Bleach. Studying medicine can't save the spirit world. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyright or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 276. Let's look forward to it. What does it mean? Senju Cheng's brain seemed to be stuck. Is this a reminder? Or a threat? What's even more outrageous is that Aizen Sosok's threat is just to ask him to change his name. Are you kidding? Senju Cheng felt that he was more or less unable to understand. However, looking at Aizen Sosok's expression that didn't seem to be joking, he still twitched his mouth slightly and said, "Aizen-kun, you're really humorous." Aizen Sosok's eyebrows seemed to be raised inadvertently, and a smile appeared on his face. He didn't care at all about the second half of the sentence that seemed to be more sarcastic than exaggerated. In Aizen Sosok's view, although he and Senju Cheng were truly equal people who can understand each other and walk together, however, the two are at different stages, so Aizen Sosok understands Senju Cheng's vigilance and hostility very well. Once, when Aizen Sosok joined the 13th Division, he also thought that he could find people who could understand each other among those death gods. However, the truth is cruel. Just like ants cannot understand the whispers of a giant dragon, even if the giant dragon bows its head for it, the whispering airwaves will only be thunder that terrifies the ants. Therefore, Cheng has not yet understood the kind of loneliness, and has not understood that he is the only one who is worthy of understanding as a true companion. For this, just a little time is enough. Aizen Sosok made this judgment accurately, and felt anticipation and joy for it. Cheng, the trip to Hukomundo, let's look forward to it. Then, Aizen Sosok, who seemed to have achieved a certain goal, waved to Senju Cheng, turned his back to Senju Cheng and walked towards his subordinates. And Aizen Sosok also returned to his usual gentle and elegant perfect posture almost without any hindrance, and handled various matters perfectly. After standing there for a few breaths, Senju Cheng waved in the direction of Rukia and the others from a distance. Of course, Rukia responded to Senju Cheng with a disapproving attitude, but the other three people headed by Hinamura seemed quite excited. Keep doing your best. I hope to see you in your Shinigami uniforms in the Seireitei next time. Senju Cheng encouraged loudly, and then disappeared instantly, leaving Hinamura and the others with eyes full of admiration and excitement. In an instant, Senju Cheng appeared on a high tower outside the abandoned steel plant, looking at Byakuya, who was wearing the aori of the captain of the 6th Division in front of him, and asked, "Byakuya, are you really not going to go down to see Rukia? There is no need for that. Anyway, the matter has been resolved, isn't it?" Byakuya responded coldly, without any trace of the previous attitude of borrowing the gate of the upper noble closest to the Shinigami Spiritual Academy in order to get here faster. That is why Senju Cheng arrived here ahead of Aizen Sosok's expectation. As for Byakuya's cold-faced but warm-hearted character, Senju Cheng, who was already used to it, did not intend to continue persuading him. He followed Byakuya's line of sight from afar to Rukia and glanced at Aizen Sosok's back. Solved? No, it's just the beginning. Senju Cheng recalled Aizen Sosok's last words and realized that this trip to Hukomundo might be more troublesome than he thought. Soul Society is not suitable for fighting, so are you going to fight in Hukomundo again? At this point, Senju Cheng felt that he and Aizen Sosok were almost half open to each other. As for the first-year students of the Mao Academy of Spiritual Arts being attacked by the Great Hollow this time, although dozens of first-year students were lost, it did not cause any waves for the entire Seireitei. It just made each division pay a little more attention to not making omissions in their duties when selecting elite Shinigami to form an expeditionary corps. And a few days later, thousands of elite Shinigami from different squads gathered in the largest square of the Seireitei. In addition to the Shinigami uniforms, these elite Shinigami also wore great cloaks with team patterns and emblems of different squads on them to distinguish the original squads of these elite Shinigami. For the Shinigami, these cloaks not only make them less dazzling in the barren desert environment of Hukomundo, but also have the effect of reducing the attraction to hollows. At the forefront of these elite Shinigami stood 3 captains headed by Aizen Sosok and 5 vice-captains headed by Suzuki Chojiro. It can be said that in view of the unusual number of terrifying Uchukas in Hukomundo, the lineup of this expeditionary corps is unprecedentedly luxurious. Even Yamamoto Jinrai Shibukuni specially arranged his vice-captain in the group, which is enough to show how much he values this expeditionary corps and his attitude of not allowing this expeditionary corps to be damaged in Hukomundo. Among them, Makatao Senju was also a member of the Expeditionary Corps Vice Captain, leading 50 elite doctors from the 4th Division as medical support for the Expeditionary Corps. In view of the danger of this trip, and in order to ensure that the affairs of the 4th Division can be handled normally, so that Unohana does not need to be busy with tedious affairs, Makatao Senju deliberately left both Kotetsuya and Yokiriza behind, and only brought Yamada Hanatao as the main assistant. Soon, under the personal command of Kurosachi Mayuri, the Technology Development Bureau opened a huge black chamber leading to Hukomundo. Yamamoto Seireitei Shichikuni knocked his cane heavily and spoke majestically. "Gentlemen, may your military fortunes prosper." Then, under the leadership of Aizen Sasuke, who stepped into the black chamber first, many elite Shinigami entered the black chamber one after another, and many vice captains entered at the end to deal with unexpected situations. Soon, thousands of elite Shinigami entered the black chamber in an orderly manner. Chojuro Suzuki looked around, then bowed in the direction of Yamamoto Seireitei Shichikuni and said in a serious tone, "We will follow too." Then, Chojuro Suzuki walked into the black chamber without hesitation, and the other vice captains also quickly followed, leaving only Senju Makatao, the vice captain of the medical team, at the end. Senju Makatao took a step towards the black chamber without hesitation, and his heart suddenly jumped. He turned back and looked at the crowd behind him who were seeing him off. Almost instantly, he recognized the familiar figure of Unohana. "Unohana teacher," Senju Makatao muttered, almost completely ignoring Kotetsuya and Yokiriza standing on both sides of Unohana, and his eyes only reflected the appearance of Unohana. Chapter 277 Ching, I'll wait for you to come back. Third update. Unohana was still so gentle and elegant. Just standing there, she was like a beautiful scenery. Compared with her, Yokiriza seemed immature and green. Compared with Kotetsuya, she was also less charming. Under the gaze of Senju Makatao, Unohana moved his lips slightly and made a few mouth shapes. Senju Makatao was slightly startled, and a smile appeared on his face almost unconsciously. "Makatao, I'll wait for you to come back." Although the two sides were quite far away, the silent understanding and familiarity still made Senju Makatao instantly understand what Unohana wanted to express. Then, Senju Makatao waved in the direction of Unohana and also made a few mouth shapes. "Wait for me." Mayuri Kurotetsu, the captain of the 12th Division, who was standing on the side of the black cavity to provide technical support, reminded him mercilessly with his head almost 90 degrees to one side. "Vice Captain Senju, don't waste a scientist's precious research time, hurry in." Senju Makatao's expression froze slightly, and his other foot subconsciously followed into the black cavity, and the surrounding environment also changed dramatically. It was dark all around, without a trace of light, and the thousands of Shinigami of the entire Expeditionary Corps walked on the road paved with spirit particles by the three captains at the front as a foothold. The vice captains at the end of the team were at the back, always paying attention to the collapse of the spirit particle road, and quickly rescued the fallen Shinigami to avoid unnecessary sacrifices and casualties. Among them, the spirit particle roads made by the three captains respectively also had obvious differences. The spirit particle road made by Aizen Sasuke was the most stable, and the spirit particle roads made by Ichimura Jin and Tosen Kaname was second. Occasionally, the Shinigami following behind had their spirit particle roads collapsed. However, with 5 vice captains at the end to prevent unexpected situations, the whole process can be regarded as passing through the broken world without any danger and entering the Hukomundo. Hukomundo. As a huge black cavity opened, 3 figures emitting extremely strong spiritual pressure walked out of it, and behind them, there were many Shinigami wearing dead suits appearing one after another. As Senju Makatao, who was at the end of the team, walked out, his eyes subconsciously swept around. The sky was dark, and there was almost no light except for a crescent moon. The surrounding environment seemed to be a barren land like a white desert. There were only a few dead trees protruding from the desert that looked like quartz, adding some changes to this barren land. "Is this the Hukomundo?" Senju Makatao said, and after taking a breath, the spirit particles that were more concentrated than those in Soul Society rushed into Senju Makatao's nasal cavity frantically. And in the microscopic world of spirit particles in Senju Makatao's sight, spirit particles were almost everywhere, and the gravel that made up the desert under his feet seemed to be formed by the compression and deposition of high-concentration spirit particles. The vice captains standing beside Senju Makatao also spoke up one after another. "It is indeed a completely different place from Soul Society, it feels so desolate. Is this the world where hollows live? Don't be too careless. Great hollows can be found everywhere in Hukomundo. Then, under the command of Aizen Sasuke, the commander of the corps, the nearby hollows were quickly purified. Then, Izanano led the Kidden clan and some Shinigami who were proficient in Kidden to build various Kidden barriers. This was also the strategy at the previous expeditionary corps, which was to establish a relatively stable rear area and then gradually purify the hollows outward based on this. Compared with the Uchikes who fought on their own in Hukomundo and the Jillians who had no self-awareness, the advantage of the expeditionary corps undoubtedly lies in the cooperation and coordination between them. Therefore, the previous expeditionary corps did not face much danger unless they encountered a vast top-level Great Hollow leading a large number of Uchikes. As the commander of this expeditionary corps, Aizen Sasuke also maintained the usual calm style in the Seireitei. He did not intend to take risks, but established a stable base in an orderly manner. After the expeditionary corps initially gained a foothold in Hukomundo, the ever-busy Aizen Sasuke convened a meeting and ordered the captain-level and vice-captain-level Shinigami to discuss. "Thank you for your hard work." As all the meeting participants arrived, Aizen Sasuke spoke gently and humbly. "First of all, thank you for your cooperation and the initial establishment of the camp." After a pause, Aizen Sasuke pushed his glasses and continued. "But everyone knows that the expeditionary corps has two goals this time. On the one hand, it is to eliminate as many Uchikas as possible to maintain the balance of souls. On the other hand, it is to confirm the reason for the abnormal number of Uchikas in Hukomundo." Hearing this, Senju Cheng did not show any expression on the surface, but in fact, he was completely alert in his heart. In Senju Cheng's view, the so-called abnormal number of Uchikas in Hukomundo is definitely related to Aizen Sasuke. Now that arrangements are made in this name, it is undoubtedly the beginning of the move. Therefore, our mission is quite arduous and must be completed before the vast old-level Great Hollows jointly siege the expeditionary corps. Aizen Sasuke paused here and said, "Therefore, I would like to hear your ideas on how to complete the mission." For a moment, the expressions of many captains and vice-captains in this slightly simple meeting tent seemed a little silent. Although the Seireitei did not have no information about the Hukomundo, belonging to two different worlds undoubtedly made a lot of information in an unequal state. Aizen Sasuke waited for a moment, but his eyes fell on Senju Cheng, who was sitting next to his Nanayu and looked gentle and a little weak, and asked, "Cheng, what do you think?" Senju Cheng resisted the idea of complaining about Aizen Sasuke. "I want to go back to the Seireitei and lie in the arms of Unohana teacher," and stood up with a more serious expression and answered, "Captain Aizen, I think it's better to be safe than sorry. On the one hand, we should ensure the safety of the camp as much as possible with sufficient combat power. On the other hand, we should slowly purify the hollows outward with the camp as the center, and try to capture the intelligent Uchikes to inquire about the abnormalities." After this, some of the vice-captains present nodded subconsciously. This approach will undoubtedly ensure that the expeditionary corps will not face the crisis of destruction. As long as the camp is still there, the expeditionary corps can always ask the Seireitei to open the black cavity to ensure a retreat. Cowardly. However, the blindfolded Tosun suddenly spoke and scolded. "Vice-Captain Senju, is the justice you uphold in your heart shrinking behind your life? If the expeditionary corps cannot purify and eliminate Uchikes in large quantities, then the balance of souls will be broken. Will you bear the serious consequences at the time? P.S. I'm stuck, and the third update is a little late." Chapter 278. Isn't this the same? Tosun Kaname's aggressive attitude made Senju Cheng look at Aizen Sasuke subconsciously. When he saw Aizen Sasuke's expression, which seemed to have not changed at all, he understood. If it was Aizen Sasuke's instruction, he would obviously not let Tosun Kaname do such a meaningless action. There is no point in accusing others. Then, Senju Cheng said with a helpless expression, "My justice is all taught by Unohana teacher. If Captain Tosun has any objections, how about I introduce Unohana teacher to a secluded place for Captain Tosun to exchange ideas next time?" In an instant, Tosun Kaname's expression froze. Perhaps some of the newly promoted captains or vice-captains are not aware of Unohana Retsu's horror, but Tosun Kaname has never forgotten the killing posture of Unohana Retsu, who killed a hollow captain with one knife during the hollow incident. To a secluded place. What's the difference between choosing a secluded grave and lying there? And Suzuki, who always has a serious expression, couldn't help laughing. As expected of a disciple of senior Unohana, even the evil spirits are inherited from him. Then, Chojuro Suzuki coughed lightly, tried to regain his serious expression, and said in a roundabout way, "Vice-Captain Senju's proposal is quite steady and cautious, and Captain Tosun's concerns are not unreasonable. If the abnormal number of Cheng-ge's in Hukomundo is left unchecked, the balance of souls will be broken. After a pause, Chojiro Suzuki said in a serious tone. And the more Cheng-ge's there are, the more likely it is that vast old level hollows will be born. You must know that each vast old level hollow is almost a natural disaster that exceeds the level of ordinary captains, so this tendency must be nipped in the bud in advance. It must be said that since hollows instinctively devour the souls of the real world and soul society, they are undoubtedly evil from the perspective of the Shinigami. Therefore, Chojiro Suzuki's remarks are also the most basic understanding and belief of the entire expeditionary corps. In order to maintain peace and justice between the real world and soul society, and to fulfill our responsibilities as Shinigami, we will go on an expedition to Hukomundo to purify the hollows. Although, from the perspective of the hollows, this statement is as ridiculous as killing them on a large scale because their large numbers affect other races. Senju Cheng, whose thinking is never limited to the identity of a Shinigami, is very clear about this, but as a Shinigami, he has no way to refute the statement of Captain Suzuki Chojiro. Aizen Sasuke's eyes also revealed a hint of contempt and disdain, but his expression seemed to become serious, and he said in agreement. Vice Captain Suzuki is right. Maintaining the balance of souls is the responsibility of the expeditionary corps. We have already made the corresponding awareness when we arrived in Hukomundo. After a pause, Aizen Sasuke pushed his glasses and said in a gentle tone. However, as the commander of the expeditionary corps, I also have the responsibility to lead you and my colleagues back to the Seireitei safely. Therefore, we must not rush ahead. While gradually purifying the hollows, we must collect the current situation and conditions of the Hukomundo step by step and then act accordingly. Senju took the lead and nodded slightly, saying in agreement. Captain Aizen is right. Senju Cheng. Senju is just looking it hard, right? Is there any substantial difference between Aizen Sasuke's conclusion and my speech? Except that Aizen Sasuke's words are beautified and a little bit false, and he acts as a responsibility to ensure the safety of his colleagues. Isn't this the same? Can this deceive people? However, it seems that the vice captains present are quite fond of this, and the eyes looking at Aizen Sasuke are obviously more friendly and approving. After all, a captain who always cares about the safety of his subordinates is undoubtedly easy to win people's hearts. Then, Aizen Sasuke seemed to deliberately curl his lips towards Senju Cheng, and then discuss the specific details of the arrangement and action with the Shinigami present. Although Aizen Sasuke was nominally the commander of the expeditionary corps, how could the Central 46th Chamber and Captain General Yamamoto really give the command of thousands of Shinigami to a captain? Therefore, whether it was Ichimura Jinmoto Senju, or the vice captains belonging to different squads, they were all for mutual checks and balances. And just like Senju Cheng was in charge of the rescue squad or as Nano was in charge of the Kidmashu, the other vice captains also had their own direct subordinates, thus forming this huge expeditionary corps. What surprised Senju Cheng was that Aizen Sasuke did not make any unreasonable arrangements. Instead, the three captains took turns to lead the team to purify the hollows, ensuring that one captain was ready to respond at any time, and one captain was guarding the camp, which was quite stable. In the following time, the expeditionary corps was divided into three parts to take turns to purify the hollows. Senju was much more relaxed than expected. The expedition rescue team was led by Yamada Hanatame, who had gradually grown up. In terms of judo and medical skills, Yamada Hanatame was also considered to be one of the top officers in the 4th Division. Therefore, under the leadership of Yamada Hanatame, the expedition rescue team was more than capable of dealing with various injuries. Senju appeared in every corner of the camp all day long, either intentionally or unintentionally, or he was alone in his tent studying the environment of Hukomundo. Compared to the Soul Society, which has the environment of the sun and the moon, mountains and rivers, the environment of Hukomundo is undoubtedly quite unique. Hukomundo has a perpetual night, and the soil is completely composed of countless gravel. The dark sky, the pale earth, there seems to be a strong sense of disharmony and conflict in Hukomundo, and when Senju Cheng occasionally looks out and thinks, he can't help but feel a sense of loneliness and emptiness. Is this place really a habitat for normal creatures? What is the significance of the birth of Hukomundo? Senju Cheng said he couldn't understand. Senju Cheng is no longer half understood or completely ignorant of the background of this world as before. Whether it is the position of vice captain, or the 50 years of living with Unohana Retsu, or the existence of Zareki Fire, Senju Cheng gradually learned a lot about the historical trajectory of the entire world. the Soul King, created the Soul Society, the real world, the Huko Mundo, the Danger, and so on. The Soul King lives in the Soul King Palace and is protected by the Zero Squad, which is not under the jurisdiction of the Central 46th Chamber and is called the exclusive agents of the royal family. As for Youthwatch, about whom Makoto Senju had some impression in his previous life, he was the king of the Queen Seas who was defeated by Yamamoto Shinigami Shichikuni about 1,000 years ago. Chapter 279. Longing for the shape of respect. And regarding the specific details of the battle 1,000 years ago, Senju Makoto reluctantly flirted with Unohana Retsu a little bit, and the unbearable Unohana teacher repeated everything in detail. In short, from Unohana teacher's perspective, that battle was really a killing spree that made Unohana teacher almost climax. Most of the members of the Stern-Crossed Knights led by the King of Queen's Youthwatch are quite durable. However, Unohana Retsu also has doubts and confusion about why Yamamoto Shinigami Shichikuni did not completely kill Youthwatch at the last moment, but instead let some of the surviving Queensies escape with Youthwatch smoothly. Of course, compared to Youthwatch who escaped to an unknown place, Senju Makoto is now more troubled by the dangerous man Aizen Sosok. The more normal Aizen Sosok behaved, the more alert Senju Makoto felt. When he thought of this, Senju Makoto's original idea of going to sleep disappeared, and he unknowingly walked around the familiar road to the tent of Izaneo, the vice captain of the 8th Division. Vice captain is, "Can I come in?" Soon, Iznaneo's response sounded in the tent. "Vice Captain Senju? Come in, it's okay." Immediately, with the consent of the owner, Senju Makoto naturally got in without any hesitation. Unlike Senju Makoto's tent, which was filled with various medical equipment, Iznaneo's tent was filled with stacks of books. As Senju Makoto came in, Iznaneo, who seemed to have a blank expression, pushed her glasses, closed the book in her hand, and then pulled out a cushion to signal Senju Makoto to sit down. However, although Iznaneo still looked like the serious glasses girl, the slightly trembling hand that pulled out the cushion undoubtedly exposed part of Iznaneo's inner thoughts. Perhaps, in the eyes of Kakushansui, there was no intersection between Iznaneo, who followed him most of the time, and Senju Makoto, let alone friendship. However, Kakushansui overlooked one point. Iznaneo had been promoted to the position of vice president of the Female Death God Association unknowingly during the past 50 years. The Female Death God Association was originally called the Attack Makoto Association and was managed by Unohana Retsu as the chairman. It is conceivable what kind of person would be allowed to be promoted to the position of vice president by Unohana Retsu. After Senju Makoto accidentally had a little in-depth contact with Iznaneo in Huko Mundo, he realized that the character of this three-no iceberg glasses girl Iznaneo seemed to be a little bit wrong. On the surface, Iznaneo never showed any strange behavior towards Senju Makoto, who was very popular in the Seireitei, and she was completely like a three-no glasses queen. However, after the outer shell of Iznaneo's iceberg was cut open, Senju Makoto always felt that the shape was more or less familiar. Well, don't think too much, it's just a shape of admiration and respect. Therefore, when Senju Makoto deliberately wanted to understand the situation of the ghost barrier in the camp, Iznaneo's reaction could not be said to be completely cooperative, but it was also that kind of feeling of wanting to welcome but not rejecting. As Senju Makoto sat down, Iznaneo also habitually pushed his glasses and asked in a rather cold tone. "Vice Captain Senju is visiting late at night. Is there anything you need?" Need. Senju Makoto was slightly startled, but he was still not used to the words that Iznaneo would occasionally say when communicating with him that didn't fit the context. "It's okay, I just passed by, so I visited Vice Captain Is." Senju Makoto replied. Iznaneo nodded, and said in a cold tone as if he was going to drive him away. "In that case, Vice Captain Senju, if you don't have anything to do, you should go back and rest, otherwise you might be misunderstood." Upon hearing this, Senju Makoto tried his best to adapt to the communication style of this cold and iceberg-like glasses girl, and said truthfully, "It's not that I have nothing to do. After seeing Vice Captain Is, I feel that there are some things I need to do tonight." Iznaneo put down the book she was about to pick up and said calmly, "Vice Captain Senju, please tell me, I will try my best to cooperate." "Okay, then I'll trouble Vice Captain Is," Senju Makoto said gently and with some gratitude. "For the ghost barrier outside the camp, I feel a little nervous tonight. I hope Vice Captain Is can take another tour with me." Iznaneo seemed to be stunned for a moment, then shook his head and stated, "There is no need for that. I will carefully inspect the status of the camp's ghost barrier 3 times a day to ensure that there are no omissions." After a pause, Izanagi pushed his glasses, and his seemingly calm and intellectual eyes looked up at Senju Cheng. Just when Senju Cheng thought that Izanagi might be angry this time and no longer agreed to his request half-heartedly as before, Izanagi changed his tone and said coldly, "But since it is Vice Captain Senju's concern and concern for my work, it is okay to go with Vice Captain Senju. If there are any omissions, please ask Vice Captain Senju to point them out." These words seemed more like a counterattack full of sarcasm to ordinary people, reminding Senju Cheng, who was responsible for medical assistance, not to interfere too much in the affairs of the ghost barrier. However, Izanagi stood up directly after speaking, and then took off his very comfortable outer clothes in front of Senju Cheng, and meticulously changed into the death suit and tied the adjutant armband. Izanagi, who changed into a Shinigami outfit and tied up her hair, was undoubtedly more capable than the look she had just had when she was about to go to bed. She took the initiative to speak. "Please, Vice Captain Senju." "Then I'll trouble Vice Captain is." Senju Cheng was very grateful. Senju Cheng said sincerely, "This is also my duty. Vice Captain Senju, don't worry about it." After that, Izanagi pushed her glasses and took the lead in walking in front of Senju Cheng. Then, under the leadership of Izanagi, Senju and Izanagi began to inspect the kidney barrier around the periphery of the camp. It must be said that as the vice captain of the extremely refined kidney, Izanagi is still firmly in the position of vice captain without a zanpakutō, which is enough to show Izanagi's kidney level. In terms of pure kidney attainments, Izanagi has surpassed most of the captain-level Shinigami. It was just that Izanagi's spiritual pressure was limited, so it was quite difficult for her to use some of the high-level ghost arts, but the ghost arts barrier she set up was quite brilliant. At least, Senju Cheng felt it was impressive. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novel, as there you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 280 King of Mundo. Therefore, in fact, the so-called inspection of the ghost barrier was mainly carried out by Izanagi, and Senju Cheng only asked questions about the ghost from time to time. In response, Izanagi seemed to have no emotional fluctuations. She seemed reluctant, but in fact, she answered every question of Senju Cheng in great detail. Even the existence of a subtle back door in the ghost barrier that protected the entire camp, and the way to easily pass through it without being rough, Izanagi also told her completely. Senju Cheng's character is undoubtedly pure and kind, and naturally he would not really secretly go through the back door and betray Izanagi's trust. However, in case of emergency, Senju Cheng wrote down everything Izanagi said without missing a word. At the same time, Mundo, Night Palace. Although it is called Night Palace and is regarded as the place where the ruler of Mundo lives, it is actually not a palace at all. Instead, it is a rough and simple building without even a ceiling. On the throne at the center of the Palace of the Night, a skeleton with a crown-shaped headdress and a long coat sat on it, seeming to exude an invisible aura of a king. Under the skeleton, a number of hollows of various shapes exuding powerful Achikage Ratsu are arranged in a somewhat scattered manner in front of him. Then, an Achikage that looked somewhat like a tiger man standing up, but whose body was covered with a bone shell, knelt down under the skeleton and reported respectfully, "Your Majesty, the Seireitei seems to have sent an expeditionary force to the Mundo. In a certain area, some hollows that originally belonged to the Palace of the Night have completely disappeared." Seireitei? Expeditionary force? The eyeless skeleton of Bone, who was honored as Your Majesty, seemed to reveal a bit of anger in his eye sockets, and the huge and heavy Ratsu exuded from his body seemed to increase a little bit, and he said, "Those little mice are really annoying. I didn't go to Soul Society to kill them. Instead, they come to Mundo to cause trouble regularly." After a pause, Zenbane seemed to have thought of something, waved his skeleton hand, and said, "Now is not the time to pay attention to those little mice. What's more important is to deal with the bug that dared to provoke the Mundo." For a moment, the hollows who surrendered to Zenbane responded in a mixed manner. "Yes, Your Majesty. As long as Your Majesty gives an order, I will follow Your Majesty to attack. Your Majesty's axe must have been thirsty for a long time. Ha ha ha, my tail is also eager to fight and stain it with fresh blood, Your Majesty, win." But Zenbane didn't care about the noisy and chaotic situation of his subordinates. Even if the Uchikais have developed self-awareness, there is no doubt that there are still various deficiencies in their hearts, and killing each other is the eternal melody between the Uchikais. As a vast top-level Great Hollow, Bylajimru Zenbei naturally had no expectation that this group of Uchikais would be able to obey orders. Then, Bylajimru Zenbei raised his hand to stop the slightly chaotic voice and said, "That stink bug is disgusting, but to kill him, more power is needed." After a pause, Bylajimru Zenbei's empty skull eye sockets seemed to scan the area below, and then spoke. "Where are the guys who aimed to pass the message to Tehilibel? Have they returned?" Many Uchikais looked at each other, and then the Uka standing in the front answered with a stiff face. Your Majesty, they haven't come back yet. Maybe they have been killed." Bang! The next moment, Bylajimru Zenbei stood up suddenly, slapped the armrest of the throne with one hand, and raised the axe full of decay with one hand. "As the Lord of Hukomundo, has my reputation as the King of Hukomundo become so weak? Not only that abominable bug, but even a woman like Tehilibel who had just been promoted to Vasto dared to ignore me and even dared to kill the envoy of Hukomundo." Then, amid the horrified eyes of many Uchikais, Bylajimru Zenbei walked down from the throne step by step, and a black mist full of decay gradually spread from his body. In an instant, the pupils of the Uchikais closest to Bylajimru Zenbei shrank, and their horrified hearts were almost completely revealed through their constantly trembling bodies. However, even so, those Uchikais-level hollows who were comparable to the captain-level death gods of the 13th Gotti squad still did not dare to move, for fear of attracting the wrath of Bylajimru Zenbei, who was regarded as the king of Hukomundo. The next moment, as Bylajimru Zenbei walked past the two Uchukas, a wisp of black mist from Bylajimru Zenbei stained the body of the Uchukas. Aging, a rapid aging that the naked eye could hardly catch appeared on the bodies of the two Uchukas. In the terrified eyes of many Uchukas, death followed. The spirits of the two Uchukas, which had reached the extreme of aging, quickly annihilated, as if they had completely disappeared in the long river of time, leaving no trace at all. If it weren't for the kneeling marks left on the ground by the two Uchukas, it would be as if they had never appeared. And Bylajimru Zenbei had no intention of turning back from beginning to end, and continued to walk forward step by step. The mysterious and terrifying skeleton figure shrouded in black mist also made the Uchukas present more awed and fearful. Then, Bylajimru Zenbei's majestic voice echoed in the Hukomundo. "Since Tehilibel is unwilling to submit to me, then I will devour Tehilibel first, and then kill that hateful stink bug. Let the entire Hukomundo understand that only the name of Bylajimru Zenbei is the eternal king of Hukomundo, and no hollow can disobey this king." Then, under Bylajimru Zenbei's order, the hollows of the entire Hukomundo almost came out in a mighty force, following Bylajimru Zenbei to encircle and suppress another vast top-level hollow Tehilibel. And just a moment after Bylajimru Zenbei led a large group of Uchikais to leave the Hukomundo, Cheng-ge, who was blindfolded, passed by the side of the Hukomundo, muttering, "Strange, why haven't we reached the Hukomundo yet? I can't sense the spiritual pressure positions of those hollows along the way." Chapter 281 Great Confidence. The next day, at the main gate of the Expeditionary Corps camp. Although the night in Hukomundo is eternal, the Expeditionary Corps still follows the time of Soul Society. Cheng-ge, who led a group of elite Shinigami to purify the hollows, returned to the camp a little later than planned. When Cheng-ge appeared at the main gate of the camp, almost half of the camp had already prepared for emergencies. Even Senju Cheng led the rescue team at the main gate of the camp to prepare to leave with the team. Aiden Susuk, who was nominally the commander of the Expeditionary Corps, quickly stepped forward and asked with concern, "Captain Tosin, what happened?" "It's much later than expected." Cheng-ge replied with a somewhat unpleasant face. "Nothing, just a small unexpected situation." Senju Cheng confirmed the number of Shinigami who were intact and said with a bit of uncertainty, "Captain Tosin is not lost, so he has not been able to return to the camp without any results." After a pause, Senju Cheng, as a doctor, showed concern for Cheng-ge, who showed hostility to him from time to time. "Captain Tosin is physically disabled but has a strong will. Blindness does not affect his determination to pursue the enemy, but determination alone is not enough. Why don't I treat Captain Tosin? Maybe he can see the light again." Hearing this, Cheng-ge didn't believe it because of his instinctive hostility and disgust towards Senju Cheng, but, see the light again. This sentence gently struck Cheng-ge's dark heart of justice. "Vice Captain Senju, can you heal my eyes?" Cheng-ge asked with some eagerness. Senju Cheng pushed his glasses and answered confidently and gently, As a doctor, I won't say anything I'm not sure of. Tosun-kane's face was almost happy, and he asked, "How sure are you?" Senju Cheng pondered for a moment, raised a finger in front of Tosun-kane, and answered, "Very good." Tosun-kane could not help but smile as he sensed the movements of Senju Cheng's spirit body, and Senju Cheng continued in a serious tone. "For now, 1%. Tosun-kane. As for the surrounding dead gods, they were also confused when they heard this. 1% is also called a very good chance. Tosun-kane's face, which was almost visibly black, gradually turned a little blue, and he questioned, "Vice Captain Senju, are you trying to provoke and anger me? How could that be?" Senju Cheng showed a kind and innocent expression, and then said, "The probability of 1% is not low. As long as we give it a little boost, Captain Tosun has a great chance of seeing the light again." Tosun-kane was startled and asked, "Give it a boost? What do you mean by giving it a boost?" "That is, by helping others transplant their eyes first, we can practice a little and gain experience." At this point, Senju Cheng paused and explained, "Captain Tosun, after all, there are not many cases of eye diseases in the Seireitei, and there are even fewer people like Captain Tosun who are blind but still do not give up, so there is relatively little clinical experience." Upon hearing this, Tosun-kane unconsciously turned his head towards his subordinates. In an instant, some of the Shinigami of the 7th Division could not help but tighten their legs, fearing that Tosun-kane would make some embarrassing orders. After all, Tosun-kane is the only blind man in the entire 7th Division. Who would be willing to have their eyes transplanted for no reason if they have no problems? What's more, the success rate is 1%, which is really too high. However, Tosun-kane, who has always had a righteous image in the Seireitei, naturally would not make such an order to persecute his subordinates in public. However, at this moment, Aiden Sosok seemed to understand something and spoke. "Makao, do you think the Hollow can replace Captain Tosun as a cushion?" "Hollow?" Senju Cheng raised his eyebrows slightly, seeming a little embarrassed, but nodded and said, "The density of spirit particles in the spirit bodies of Ichike's level hollows is quite close to that of Captain level Shinigami, so it might be worth a try." After a pause, Senju Cheng said with a smile, "If Captain Tosun feels that the 1% probability is a bit unpredictable, then you can try to capture some Ichike's hollows for me to use as a cushion on them first. How about that?" Tosun-kane pondered for a moment, with an ambiguous attitude. In this regard, Senju Cheng was just like a passing enthusiastic doctor, and after making a request for treatment, he left. Afterwards, after Tosun-kane completed the basic handover, he followed Aizen Sosok into an empty tent. "How is it?" At this moment, compared to the gentleness he showed outside, Aizen Sosok's tone seemed unusually calm. As for Tosun-kane, who lowered his head, he gritted his teeth slightly and said shamefully, "Lord Aizen, no, I didn't find that Kainya Palace." Aizen Sosok didn't say anything, but his eyes seemed to droop a little, and his eyes fell on Tosun-kane. Instantly, Tosun-kane felt a huge pressure in his heart, and his whole body was tense, and he hurriedly explained, "I followed the direction that Lord Aizen said, and I didn't sense the spiritual pressure reaction of a large number of hollows gathered together along the way, nor did I encounter a large building complex that can be called the Kainya Palace." After a pause, Tosun-kane continued, "But on the way back, I did pass by a piece of broken eaves and broken walls, but there was no spiritual pressure above the level of Ichike's inside." Aiden Sosok didn't make any comments on this, but sat down calmly, his eyes moving, as if thinking about something. The 12th Division discovered through the recently developed instrument that the number of spiritual pressure reactions above the level of Achukas in Hutomundo is abnormal. It's just that during this period of time when Hutomundo was being purified, the number of hollows encountered by the expeditionary force was far lower than expected, which was completely inconsistent with the situation of a sudden increase in the number of hollows at the level of Achukas. As for the direction that the Tosun-kane was heading to, it was clearly the location of the Kuraya Palace recorded in the Seireitei, but there was no spiritual pressure reaction from the hollows either, only a piece of broken eaves and broken walls. All kinds of information continued to connect and relate to each other in Aizen Sosok's mind. Hutomundo, what happened in silence? Has a new king of Hutomundo been born? In the end, the image of Makao Senju emerged in Aizen Sosok's mind. Some kind of premonition made Aizen Sosok feel that all this was related to Makao Senju. Makao-kun, you are worthy of it, even though I'm watching you every moment. Have you still made plans for Hutomundo outside of my sight? This is really interesting. In that case, let's play a game of gambling in Huko Mundo. Chapter 282. The Ichike's group in nowhere. At this thought, Aiden Sosop recalled the request that Senju Makatao had just made to treat Tosen Kaneme's eyes. Capture of Ichike's, which made Aiden Sosop feel that Senju Makatao had ulterior motives. Ichike's? Interesting, Makatao-kun. You actually understood that my next step would be to conduct the Death God transformation experiment on Ichike's level hollows just by guessing. So, the mention of capturing Ichike's was purely to counterattack me, to prove that even if I didn't deliberately expose the information in the Seireitei, you also knew it. Ha 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 ha. At the end of the story, Aiden Sosop couldn't help but laugh happily and happily. Yes, that's the feeling. Indistinctly, Aiden Sosop seemed to have seen that the other side of the chessboard he had set up was no longer empty, and Senju Makatao's figure had gradually appeared, holding the pieces and smiling at him. On the contrary, Tosen Kaname was a little confused the whole time when he heard Aiden Sosop's laughter. He didn't understand why. Wasn't he reporting the mission of finding Huko? Why did Lord Aiden suddenly mention the matter of capturing Ichike's as mentioned by Senju Makatao? Could it be, even though he was standing in front of Lord Aiden was still thinking about Senju Makatao? Thinking of this, Tosen Kaname's inexplicable disgust for Senju Makatao seemed to deepen. Then, Tosen Kaname calmed down and asked, Lord Aiden, what should we do now? It's just a few unexpected changes. It seems that Makatao has hidden most of the chess pieces that can be used in Huko Mundo in advance. Aiden Sosop pushed his glasses and said. Then the opposite is naturally to find those chess pieces first. Then, Aiden Sosop convened an emergency meeting in the name of the Expeditionary Corps Commander. The content of the meeting was that the density of Ichike's encountered by the Expeditionary Corps during this period was far lower than expected. Undoubtedly, in this case, with a little thought, there are only two possibilities. Either the instruments and conclusions of the 12th Division are wrong, or there is a large-scale gathering of Ichike's level or higher hollows somewhere in Huko Mundo. Among them, if the instruments and conclusions of the 12th Division are wrong, it would be fine. If it is the second case, the consequences will almost make the Shinigami attending the meeting frown. You know, nearly 200 years ago, Soul Society also had an Ichike's invasion led by the vast level hollows or Apollogrants. And if the number of Ichike's in Huko Mundo is really more than 5 times the usual number, it is very likely that the number of Ichike's will reach about 500 to 800. In other words, 500 to 800 ordinary captain-level hollows gathered together. This level of terrifying combat power is almost not something that the GOTY 13 Division can resist. Everyone, that means the worst situation may have already happened. Aiden Sosop frowned, and said in a calm and gentle tone that was a little more impatient than usual. There is no time for the Expeditionary Corps to gradually purify the hollows. The most urgent task is to confirm as quickly as possible whether there are hollows gathering and whether there is a tendency to attack Soul Society. As soon as these words came out, the atmosphere in the entire meeting tent became quite solemn. Then, Suzuki Chojiro asked bluntly. What does Captain Aiden think we should do? With the camp as the center, each captain and vice-captain will lead a team to search for the existence of the Ichike's hollows. Aiden Sosop said with a bit of heaviness. What about the camp? Who will be stationed there? Suzuki Chojiro asked pointedly. Under such circumstances, in order to protect the safety of the Seireitei, the GOTY 13 cannot continue to send reinforcements to Huko Mundo, and once we go out in full force, the Ichike's hollows raid the camp and destroy the black chamber opened by the Technology Development Bureau, then we will not be able to return to Soul Society in a short period of time, and Soul Society will no longer be able to provide us with any assistance. At this time, Tosen Kaname stood up and took the lead in expressing his attitude in an extremely righteous tone, saying, I agree with Captain Aiden's decision. The purpose and duty of the GOTY 13 is to protect the safety of the Seireitei at all costs. Since the existence of the hollows may cause a devastating impact on the Seireitei, this is the time for us to uphold justice in our hearts without fear of death. As Tosen Kaname made this impassioned speech, the expressions of the Shinigami present were slightly moved. Senju Makatao saw this change clearly. That's right, it's moral kidnapping. Tosen Kaname once again stood on the commanding heights of justice and launched a moral kidnapping, trying to forcibly raise the moral standards of everyone, and then kidnap them to keep pace with himself. Unfortunately, Senju Makatao's regular moral level when he is not a doctor is very flexible, so he was not moved at all when he heard it, just a little solemn. During this period of time, Senju Cheng has been paying attention to the actions of Aizen Sasuke and Tosen, combined with the intelligence that Aizen Sasuke in his previous life might take the opportunity to control the Hukou. It is speculated that Aizen Sasuke probably intends to use the expeditionary force to consume the combat power of the Hukou. And Tosen's unusual delay in returning to the camp not long ago made Senju Cheng suspect that it was Aizen Sasuke who caused Tosen to make certain arrangements outside, and now he began to push the expeditionary force to disperse and attract most of the combat power of the Hukou. As for the abnormal number of Uchikas in Hukou, Senju Cheng is more inclined to believe that it is a false image created by Aizen Sasuke, which makes Aizen Sasuke's actions more rational. However, as the commander of the Expeditionary Corps, Aizen Sasuke undoubtedly holds the righteousness. After Aizen Sasuke and Tosen clearly agreed, the last remaining captain, Ichimura Jin, would not clearly oppose Aizen Sasuke. In addition, the possibility described by Aizen Sasuke is indeed quite terrifying, and many vice-captains also expressed their agreement. However, for safety reasons, the meeting initially decided that Chojiro would leave most of the elite Shinigami to stay in the camp alone, and continue to try to purify the hollows. The captains would act alone to find the Uchikas hollows, and the other vice-captains would act in pairs. Immediately, Shigetetsu Zeman and Shibukai almost subconsciously cast a look of seeking team formation towards Senju Cheng. After all, after the giant booger descended upon the first squadron's barracks, almost no one in the entire Seireitei would doubt that Senju Cheng did not have the strength of a captain. Chapter 283 Another Spirit. At this moment, Izaneo, who had always been rude to Senju Cheng, stood directly beside Senju Cheng and explained her decision with her actions. Seeing this, Shigetetsu Zeman and Shibukai looked at each other, and seemed to feel that the other was the only warmth they could hug. Wait, suddenly, Senju Cheng, who had been silent in the meeting, stood up, and then humbly and politely bowed slightly to the three captains. In an instant, except for Tosen who took it for granted to enjoy Senju Cheng's salute, Aizen Sasuke and Ichimura Jin almost instinctively moved their toes, subconsciously trying to dodge sideways, but stopped abruptly. Then, Aizen Sasuke glanced at Tosen, who raised his chin slightly, and asked, "Does Cheng have any objections?" "Three captains, I can't say that I have any objections. After all, this matter involves the safety of Soul Society, and the impact is significant and imminent. The plan mentioned by Captain Aizen seems to be the only option, but," after a pause, Senju Cheng spoke. "You all know me. After all, I'm only a vice-captain of the 4th Division. I'm good at Kido and medical skills, and I have only mastered a little bit of combat skills." The corners of the mouths of the captains and vice-captains present twitched slightly. "A little? Or a billion points? If I remember correctly, Senju Cheng defeated Kachikabyukai Shikai more than 50 years ago with this Shikai. Not long ago, he defeated Ichimura Jin and Soyoi Feng at the same time, and demonstrated what a hand-rubbed nuclear explosion is in public." Senju Cheng noticed the changes in his colleagues' expressions, and immediately patched himself up and said, "My only weapon that can be used in battle is my Bankai, but the Bankai is undoubtedly clumsy and slow compared to the excellent Bankai of the captains. Once I encounter the group of Uchikas hollows, I will not be able to escape at all." After a pause, Senju Cheng said with some shame, "Therefore, I hope to switch with Vice-Captain Suzuki, and I will stay in the camp and wait for everyone's return." "Don't worry." Senju Cheng supported the table with both hands, his eyes were firm and full of awareness. "I will live and die with the camp, and I will never retreat a step, and I will protect the Black Cavity returning to Soul Society and wait for everyone's return." Compared with Tosen's previous empty words of moral kidnapping, Senju Cheng's words, which first humbly belittled himself, and then clearly stated that he would wait for everyone's return at the risk of his life, made people admire him even more. Especially Izaneo, the glasses that he pushed subconsciously almost completely reflected the appearance of Senju Cheng alone. Aizen Sasuke heard this and asked with his eyes slightly narrowed, "Cheng, are you really going to stay in the camp?" "Yes." Senju Cheng replied. Suddenly, Aizen Sasuke couldn't help but look at Senju Cheng deeply, and a trace of doubt emerged in his heart. "Why? Obviously, we can easily get out of the camp with this opportunity, and then both of us will go to the dark and start playing some interesting games." Cheng actually gave up this opportunity. Instead, he restricted himself to the camp. Then, Aizen Sasuke asked Suzuki Chojiro, "What does Vice-Captain Suzuki think?" Suzuki Chojiro nodded and answered calmly and seriously, Vice Captain Senju is right. Vice Captain Senju's Bankai is very strong, but he is more suitable for defending a certain place. He is indeed more suitable for staying in the camp than me. Okay, in this case, then I will trouble Makatao to leave most of the Shinigami to stay in the camp. Aizen Sasuke said. No trouble, on the contrary, Captain Aizen, you are the ones who shoulder the heavy burden. Senju Makatao responded with a gentle smile, and Aizen Sasuke also responded with a similar smile. Then, after the meeting, Aizen Sasuke, Sosurankane, Ichimura Jin, and the 4 vice captains in 2 teams set off almost at the same time, leaving the Expeditionary Corps camp in the name of searching for the group of Achuka's hollows. So far, the person with the highest position in the entire camp is Senju Makatao, and he needs to manage nearly 1,000 Shinigami who stay in the camp to slowly continue to purify the hollows. For a time, the affairs that are several times heavier than ordinary team affairs seem to be all pressed on Senju Makatao's head, and the dense number of Shinigami in the camp are also supervising Senju Makatao's every move at all times. Senju Makatao, who has served as vice captain for nearly 50 years, has also demonstrated excellent management skills, and the affairs of the entire Expeditionary Corps are handled in an orderly manner. In the eyes of many dead gods, Senju Makatao's behavior is quite regular. It seems that he is gradually following a fixed schedule due to the heavy workload. On weekdays, he handles various affairs in the tent. However, unlike the business imagined by many death gods, Senju Makatao feels that his biggest problem now is that his blood pressure seems to be rising a little. How many times have I told you that you should walk slowly and don't raise your chin, so that you can give people a gentle and humble feeling? Yes, you should also wave your hand slowly, don't show such an idiotic smile. It's impossible for Senju Makatao to show such an expression. Inside the tent, 2 Senju Makatao with exactly the same appearance are in it. One of them looks gentle and also reveals a bit of irritability that seems to be suppressed, the other one has clear eyes, giving people a feeling that seems to be easy to deceive. Just when the patience of one of the Senju Makatao seems to be gradually approaching the edge of exhaustion, the other Senju Makatao lies down completely in a soft posture, looking like a mess that will never move no matter what Senju Makatao does. Master Cheng-ge, it's so difficult. The Lun family can't learn it, are you sure? Senju Makatao crossed his arms and looked at Shinigami, who was lying in front of him in the appearance of Senju Makatao, and said, in this case, I can only confiscate your body. From now on, you'll stay in the spiritual space forever and be a little waste. In an instant, Shinigami jumped up, waving his hands repeatedly, begging. Master Cheng-ge, don't do this. If you do this, the Lun family will never be able to eat the konpito, honey, and damaku hidden in the Female Death God Association, and they can't go to Rukonge to play. However, Senju Makatao looked at Shinigami, who was using his appearance but had an extremely embarrassing look, and felt angry. It's just that spirit superposition is originally derived from the ability of Zanpakutō Muramasa to materialize Zanpakutō, although spirit superposition has no meaning for extreme spirit. However, based on this, Senju Makatao deliberately created a spirit body that is exactly the same as himself through spirit particle control. The only flaw is that this spirit body can only be used perfectly by Senbon. Chapter 284 Come, take 2 steps. Of course, what Shinigami didn't know was that Shinigami had allowed Senju Makatao to play in the jingling court many times through the temporary spirit created by spirit control. In Senju Makatao's view, it was free experimental labor, and Shinigami was constantly verifying and repairing the various defects of the spirit created by spirit control. And if Senju Makatao's guess was correct, Aizen Sasuke must have kept some surveillance in the camp to keep track of the situation in the camp at any time. Therefore, the spirit of Cheng controlled by Shinigami was a perfect way to confuse Aizen Sasuke. What Senju Makatao is quite troubled about now is how to let the Zanpakutō Shinigami Sword Soul stay in the camp instead of himself, so that he can really move from light to dark. But for now, the spirit of Cheng controlled by Shinigami is undoubtedly too clumsy, and that level of expression management is undoubtedly extremely easy to reveal flaws. Suddenly, Senju Makatao frowned and said, thinking of something. Shinigami, stop making trouble. There is not much time to waste now. Preventing Aizen Sasuke from completely controlling Hukomundo is the only way for the entire Expeditionary Corps to return safely to the Seireitei. In Senju Makatao's view, all of Aizen Sasuke's actions and smoke bombs so far are undoubtedly pointing to one goal: controlling Hukomundo. Once Aizen Sasuke completely controls Hukomundo, he will have a large number of large hollow chess pieces at his disposal. By then, Aizen Sasuke will have countless ways to destroy the entire Expeditionary Corps or get rid of some Shinigami. Senju Cheng is particularly clear that being able to see Aizen Sosok's true self is undoubtedly Aizen Sosok's biggest thorn in the eye. Before Aizen Sosok may begin to rebel against the Seireitei according to the original trajectory, Senju Cheng is very clear that he is the biggest variable in all of Aizen Sosok's plans. As for why Aizen Sosok didn't attack Senju Cheng in the Seireitei or the camp, Senju Cheng also knew that it was only because of his own reality that was not affected by the ability of the Mirror Flower and Water Moon, so Aizen Sosok, who was not ready to leave the Seireitei, could not attack directly. Therefore, Senju Cheng decided to play along with the plan and let the spirit of Cheng controlled by Senju Cheng appear in the open as bait, while he hid in the dark and waited for an opportunity to destroy Aizen Sosok's plan to control the Hukomundo. As Senju Cheng's expression seemed to become serious, Senju Cheng subconsciously lowered his head and pouted slightly in response. Master Cheng is really boring. Can't you play with the Lun family for a while longer? Then, the spirit of Cheng controlled by Senju Cheng stood up from the ground, and his eyes were no longer as retarded as before. Instead, he had a bit more gentleness, and his temperament suddenly changed. At a glance, even Senju Cheng himself seemed to be unable to see any flaws. Then, Senju Cheng stepped back a few steps to make room and said, "Come on, take 2 steps." Senbon Bancho nodded slightly, took a step, and walked with a calm demeanor. Senju Cheng stroked his chin, looked at another self from this special angle, and secretly evaluated. "I have to say that I am really the face of Seireitei. Only Kachikabukai and Aizen Sosok can touch the lower limit of this face, right? As for Senbon Bancho's disguise level, Senju Cheng can't find any flaws at all." This also once again verified Senju Cheng's previous guess that Senbon Bancho, this little fool, was just pretending to be a fool. After all, if it really comes down to who is the person who knows Senju Cheng the best, it is undoubtedly not Unohana Retsu, who has been with him day and night for more than 50 years, but the zanpakutō Senbon Bancho who has been with Senju Cheng almost all the time in that past. Perhaps, Senju Cheng would not know Senju Cheng's thoughts and ideas clearly, but how could he not know about Senju Cheng's various behaviors and habits? Very good, Senju Cheng, the camp is now in your hands. Take up your responsibilities as the vice captain of the 4th Division. Do you understand? Senju Cheng said. Cheng's spirit controlled by Senju Cheng smiled gently and confidently, and replied, "Master, don't worry. This spirit is almost equivalent to another master who does not have the ultimate spirit, but in the environment of Hukomundo is extremely high spirit density." When he said this, Senju Cheng paused, and said with a glimmer of expectation in his seemingly gentle eyes, "Master, you will allow the Rin family to be a little willful, right?" Senju Cheng thought for a while and replied, "Don't use the zanpakutō ability that I have never used in front of others. The rest is up to you." In an instant, Senju Cheng seemed to have revealed his true form, cheered, and looked at Senju Cheng with eyes full of joy and excitement. Master Cheng is indeed the best in the world. The Lun family likes Master Cheng the most, but Senju Cheng is now facing Senju Cheng's own face, which makes Senju Cheng feel strange. "Hey, don't be too happy too soon," Senju Cheng coughed lightly, and then said to the various documents piled up in the corner of the tent, "Don't forget to review and process those documents as soon as possible, and don't make any trouble for me, otherwise you won't be able to play outside the spiritual space with your spirit body in the future." In an instant, Senju Cheng's body froze, staring blankly at the almost mountainous documents, and the whole person almost collapsed visibly, and a layer of resentful black air filled up. "Master, I don't know any high-level swordsmanship, but you are really proficient in various low-level swordsmanship. In the history of Seireitei, it has never been heard of that there is a master who squeezes zanpakutō to this extent." What made Senju Cheng even more helpless was that under the temptation of going out to play for 3 hours in the past in jingling time, Senju Cheng, who had been carefully trained, really had no problem handling these documents similar to team affairs. However, so many, when will it be processed? Just when Senju Cheng suddenly came to his senses and was about to issue the strongest protest to his master, Senju Cheng had already disappeared without a trace. What a joke! What is Senju Cheng waiting for if he doesn't run away at this time? Is he waiting to take responsibility and share that burden with Senju Cheng? As for whether Senju Cheng will give up and abandon the burden, Senju Cheng is not worried at all. After all, creating a real spirit out of thin air, in addition to relying on the ability of spiritual control, what is more important is the knowledge related to the spirit. Therefore, Senbon Bancho is the one holding the knife, and Senbon Bancho is just the knife in his hand. Chapter 285 Terrible. Although the camp is still restricted by the ghost barrier at all times, after being taught by his Naneo, Senju Bancho is very familiar with the back door and the whole process is very smooth. The ghost barrier looks like a transparent membrane. In addition to being extremely tough, this ghost barrier also has a large number of nodes similar to the structure of nerves. Whether it is approached or broken through by external force, it will attract the attention of the entire camp. However, under the guidance of his Naneo, Senju Bancho also knows that this ghost barrier is not as tight as it looks on the surface, otherwise the inside will be completely isolated by the ghost barrier, and the expeditionary corps will not be able to breathe normally. In the case that Bancho Senju does not have the high-level ghost art of anti-ghost killing, and with the terrifying ghost theory reserve, he can see through the weakness of the ghost barrier at a glance and quietly complete the breakthrough. The trick is to use some holes in the ghost barrier that exchange gas with the outside world. Bancho Senju shields the sensing nodes known in advance, and then he passes quietly like a needle without destroying the ghost barrier. Soon, Bancho Senju left the camp, then took off his death suit, and covered his body with a grey cloak to cover his figure and headed towards zanpakutō, that is, the direction of the spirit particle that was integrated into the zanpakutō. Although Bancho Senju is not 100% sure whether zanpakutō has found the special spirit particle from the countless spirit particles that make up the zanpakutō. However, this is undoubtedly the best way for Bancho Senju to confirm zanpakutō's whereabouts. What makes Senju Bancho a little regretful is that if zanpakutō had delayed the plan a little bit, then Senju Bancho would have the opportunity to use the opportunity of helping Tosenkaname heal his eyes to leave the seed of forest in Tosenkaname's body. In this way, if zanpakutō, Ichimura Jin, and Tosenkaname can all determine their whereabouts, it will not be difficult to confirm zanpakutō's whereabouts. However, what makes Senju Bancho feel a little relieved is that during this period of time, the position of zanpakutō has never stopped moving from beginning to end, which vaguely shows that zanpakutō has been moving at a high speed. Could it be, zanpakutō is really looking for something? As this thought flashed through Senju Bancho's mind, the whole person also maintained a relatively uniform high-speed instant step and rushed towards a certain direction of zanpakutō. As for the environment of Mundo, when Senju Bancho was really rushing on that pale desert, he further felt the severity of it. The black and white of the whole world seemed like they would never meet. Everything he saw seemed to be desolate and lonely forever. This was quite strange to Bancho Senju, who was used to living in the barracks of the 4th Division, which was full of colorful flowers. In fact, Bancho Senju inexplicably had the illusion that he was wandering alone in a world without an end. 1 day, 2 days, just when Bancho Senju had become somewhat numb to this lonely journey. And the number of Ichike's level great hollows that Bancho Senju encountered along the way was very small. Even if Bancho Senju wanted to relieve his boredom, he had no one to communicate with or vent his feelings. At this moment, Bancho Senju's movement suddenly paused, and a very strong spiritual pressure suddenly broke into the range of his spiritual pressure sensing. Ichike's? No. This is far beyond the level of Ichike's, the highest level great hollow in Mundo. Then, before Senju Cheng could think about it, after the vastode hollow, he sensed the spiritual pressure of a large number of Ichike's level hollows of varying strengths. Wait, there is another vastode hollow's spiritual pressure. Senju Cheng's eyes narrowed slightly, and he sensed the spiritual pressure of the large number of hollows faintly heading towards his direction. Then, Senju Cheng turned his eyes and walked towards the huge dead tree that was similar to quartz material closest to him, and then he leaned directly towards the dead tree. Spirit particle control. As Senju Cheng pressed his palm on the dead tree, a large number of spirit particles quickly combined according to the density, order and structure of the dead tree itself, covering Senju Cheng's body with a layer of material similar to the dead tree, completely hiding Senju Cheng. From a distance, the dead tree that Senju Bancho was leaning against looked like a dead tree with slightly thicker roots, and there was no sense of disobedience at all. In addition, the cloak that Senju Bancho was wearing was a cloak that he had obtained from Shifen Yuan Yorishi and had the function of hiding spiritual pressure. All these factors combined together made Senju Bancho seem to have completely disappeared from the spot, as if no one could detect his existence. Soon, within Senju Bancho's field of vision, several figures that seemed a little embarrassed broke in. Among them, the 3 somewhat strange-looking Ichike's figures were almost subconsciously ignored by Senju Bancho, and his eyes instinctively focused on the nearly human-like figure that exuded the spiritual pressure of a vastode-level great hollow. In an instant, that figure almost became the most pleasing color that Senju Cheng had seen in the past 2 days. The dazzling golden hair, healthy wheat-colored skin, beautiful face, and a few bone shells covering the vital parts of the body, whether it is the plump polytext, the long legs, or the slender waist, there is no cover at all. This is a generous lady, and more importantly, she did not set up unnecessary defenses against a pure gentleman like Senju Cheng. Of course, as for the group of strange shapes in Hukou Mundo, except for the confused Killian, most of the Ichikais who are full of killing and pursuing the missing parts in their hearts probably don't know how to appreciate it. Wait, that's terrible. As the distance with Haribal continued to shorten, Senju Cheng quickly recalled this number 3 of the 10 blades in the original trajectory from his previous life. As for the 3 strange-looking Ichikais following Haribal, Senju Cheng barely identified the corresponding identity. These were the 3 subordinates that Haribal would follow in the future: Apache, Myra, and Sun Sung. Then, Senju Cheng's eyes swept over them, and then lingered for a moment on Haribal's uncovered chest, some eye-catching wounds. In addition, the 4 hollows, including Haribal, looked extremely embarrassed, with blood all over their bodies. But, it seems that they are being hunted. Chapter 286. The Collision of Vast Odd. Then, Senju Cheng raised his eyes and looked behind Haribal, and large groups of Ichikais of various shapes came into view. For a moment, the spiritual pressure composed of a large number of captain-level Ichikais was almost like a rolling wave, sweeping across. 10, 20, 50. Senju Cheng simply glanced and confirmed that there were more than 50 Ichikais. You know, although Ichikais are relatively weak in various combat skills compared to normal captain-level Shinigami, they are also far beyond the normal vice-captain level. This power is enough to impact the jingling court. Then, Senju Cheng's eyes fell on the throne held by 4 Ichikais at the back of the Ichikais group, a skeleton wearing a crown and a long coat. Bilajimru Zenbane. Whether it is from the memories of the previous life or the information recorded in the Seireitei, there is information about this king of Hukou Mundo. This is an ancient Hollow King who has controlled Hukou Mundo for who knows how many years. He is also the highest level Vastode level Hollow in Hukou Mundo. He controls the power of decay. Anything touched by his power will quickly decay. And what is in front of us, is it a fight between 2 Vastode level Hollows in Hukou Mundo? However, as the king of Hukou Mundo, Bilajin has no martial ethics. It is obvious that he is bringing nearly 100 Ichikais level Hollows to besiege Haribal. Based on the mentality of watching a show and the position of appearance, Senju Cheng subconsciously slightly favors Haribal. Soon, Senju Cheng saw the problem. Compared with Haribal's injuries, the injuries of the 3 Ichikais Apache, Sun Sun, and Myra who followed her were undoubtedly more serious, and most of them were injuries that affected their movements. With Haribal's ability as a Vastode level Hollow of the highest level in Hukou Mundo, it would be a simple matter for him to shake off the pursuit of the group of Ichikais Hollows behind him. How insidious. So they are planning to track down Haribal, who is also a Vastode level Hollow, in this way? Senju Cheng glanced at Bilajin, who seemed to be full of the demeanor of a king, and had a new understanding of that king of Hukou Mundo. Bang! About 50 meters away from Senju Cheng, Myra, who was following Haribal, seemed to have a completely broken wound, and fell directly on the desert due to the unstable center of gravity. Myra. Suddenly, Haribal and others paused in their steps, and turned back to look at Myra. Damn it. Myra turned her head and looked at the knees under her body, which seemed to be overwhelmed and exposed the white bones. She angrily and unwillingly hammered the sand, and then shouted at Haribal and others. Lord Haribal, don't worry about me, go ahead, I'll catch up with you soon. Apache and Sun Sung shouted. Fool, do you want to stay and die? Don't act on your own. Aren't you always very strong? Hurry up and run. If you track down Lord Haribal, I won't let you off easily. As for Haribal, he frowned and looked at Myra's knee that could no longer move, and said calmly. Enough, there is no need to continue the meaningless dispute at this time. Then, Haribal raised the white-boned giant sword in his hand, smashed it heavily in the sand, and said calmly to the rolling group of Ichikais in front of him. Just prepare for battle. This calm tone made Myra, Apache and Sun Sung's eyes tear up, and they all spoke. Lord Haribal, you should leave quickly. That's right, that bastard Bilajin is targeting Lord Haribal, we can do it. Yes, without us as a burden, Bilajin will never be able to stop Lord Haribal. However, Haribal's calm tone, which seemed to be unshaken, responded to Myra, Apache and Sun Sung. What nonsense are you talking about? It's me who got you into trouble. It's my incompetence that I failed to protect my subordinates." Before Haribal could finish, the large group of Uchikais had completely surrounded them. The throne carried by the 4 Uchikais was placed 100 meters away from Haribal. Sitting on it, Bilajon supported his head with one hand, as if looking down at Haribal, and said, "Haribal, I will ask you one last time. If you become my subordinate, I will forgive your past rudeness and promise that you will continue to walk in Huko Mundo as a Vastode level hollow." Such a boring question, no matter how many times you ask, the answer will only be one. Haribal, surrounded by countless Achukas level hollows, said with those green eyes that seemed to be as calm as the ocean. "No matter what, I will never recognize the kind of organization that gets power by killing others to make itself stronger, and I will not join the kind of organization that despises the sacrifice of subordinates." Bilajon commented disdainfully. "What a stupid idea. The world of hollows is a world of killing, a world of mutual devouring. Moreover, as the highest-ranking Vastode level hollow in Huko Mundo, do you actually have unnecessary pity for a mere Achukas group? Don't forget that you also evolved by devouring countless Achukas, Haribal." "That's right," Haribal said. "It is precisely because I have experienced the pain and sorrow of being an Uchikais and Killian, and now that I have evolved into the highest level Vastode that does not need to rely on devouring other hollows to maintain its own existence, shouldn't I have a little pity for my former self?" "Too cowardly, woman." Bilajon stood up from the throne and said, "Do you think Vastode is the end? Today I will let you thoroughly understand how huge the gap between Vastode and Vastode is, and then I will let you become one of my nutrients." And at the moment when Bilajon's voice fell, the surrounded Haribal took the initiative and charged towards Bilajon surrounded by a large number of Uchikais, and Bilajon raised the axe in his hand and commented arrogantly, "This courage is admirable and foolish." The next moment, under the gaze of a large number of Uchikais and Senju Cheng, Bilajon and Thribal collided with each other, and 2 terrifying spiritual pressures collided and rushed straight into the sky. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novel, as there you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 287 Stupid Ideas. This was the collision of the highest level Great Hollows of Huko Mundo, Vastode, and also that collision of a giant sword and a giant axe. In terms of pure size, both Bilajon and Haribal were not much different from humans, but the storm and aftermath that erupted in the instant of the collision between the two sides almost made the surrounding giant Uchikais level Great Hollows retreat a few steps. Dang dang dang, a series of exciting collisions continued to sound. Perhaps Vastode level Great Hollows are still not as good as Captain level Death Gods in terms of pure skills, but what they have is a pure killing instinct. Every Vastode was almost evolved by bathing in the blood of countless Uchikais and stepping on countless bones. In that long and protracted fight, every Vastode almost had a unique and systematic way of fighting. For a moment, between the slashing of the giant axe and the sweeping of the giant sword, the battle between Bilajon and Haribal quickly entered a white-hot stage. However, compared to Haribal's all-out effort, Bilajon, who looked like a skeleton, seemed to have some strength left. He spoke as his jaw opened and closed. Too weak. Too weak. Haribal. If you're only this level, it will only tarnish the name of Vastode. The next moment, a layer of black mist suddenly rose from Bilajon's other hand bone, and the moment the giant axe stuck to the giant sword, it grabbed towards Haribal's face. It was the black mist that represented decay. Haribal's expression changed slightly for the first time, and the spiritual pressure inside the giant sword that was stuck for a short time and seemed to be hollow suddenly surged. Blue sword cannon. The next moment, just as Bilajon's hand bone was about to touch Haribal, who had a calm look, the giant sword suddenly exploded with a shockwave that was similar to a virtual flash. Boom. A huge explosion occurred, and Haribal took the opportunity to pull away. The smoke caused by the explosion slowly dissipated, and the Bilajon who was revealed was also unharmed. Then, Bilajon raised his left hand bone, which was still emitting a little smoke, and asked with a disdainful tone, "I am so disappointed. It is rumored that you refused to devour other hollows in any form after you were promoted to Vastode. Is this true?" Haribal did not speak, but the 5 fingers holding the giant sword tightened a little. However, Sun Sung and others who were protected by Haribal knew very well that what Bilajon said was the truth. Haribal never devoured other hollows, which made Haribal almost no increase in strength after becoming Vastode. Instead, he was in a relatively weak state almost every moment. At this time, Myra, who was lying on the ground and unable to move, gritted her teeth and spoke. Lord Harrible, devour me, let me become the strength of Lord Harrible instead of a mere burden. Suddenly, Sun Sung and Apache, who looked at Harrible with worry in their eyes, suddenly realized and spoke one after another. That's right, Lord Harrible, I've troubled you with your care for this period of time. Now is the time to repay Lord Harrible. Lord Harrible, please devour us. If I can become a part of Lord Harrible, I will be willing. This scene not only stunned the surrounding Achaques, but even Bylajin was slightly shocked. What's going on? How could there be a hollow in this world that is willing to be devoured by other hollows? Hollows are all missing a part of their souls, and they will only seek to fill the missing part for the rest of their lives. In the constant killing, they will constantly devour their own kind. This is a hollow. And Harrible's green eyes swept towards Sun Sunday and others behind him, and then his golden eyelashes closed, staring at Bylajin again, and said calmly, there is no need for this. What I pursue is sacrifice. If this is the case, then the price of sacrifice must be paid. After a pause, Harrible's tone softened a little and said, your reaction has made me understand that sacrifice is not without value. Even hollows can have their own hearts, understand each other, and sacrifice each other. This is enough. These words not only made the eyes of the numerous Achaques hollows around them flicker, but even the look in Senju Cheng's eyes when he looked at Harrible changed. A vast willing to sacrifice for Achaques? At first, Senju Cheng thought Harrible would be the so-called saintly character, obsessed with those trivial matters, with unnecessary sympathy overflowing, but sacrificing others to realize his own sympathy. However, Harrible's sacrifice was to verify the idea he was obsessed with at the cost of himself. Although Senju Cheng is not such a noble person, it does not affect Senju Cheng's respect for Harrible. However, these words, heard by Bylajin, are undoubtedly more like a provocation to his way of ruling Hukomundo for thousands of years. Stupid idea, stupid words, stupid behavior. Bylajin commented with 3 stupidities in a row, pointed the giant axe in his hand at Harrible, and said, it is because of this stupidity that Harrible will be buried here today, and even your cherished subordinates. After a pause, Bylajin ordered the group of Achaques in a domineering and absolute tone. Devour those 3 Achaques completely for me. In an instant, even though Harrible had a certain realization in his heart, he still couldn't help but burst out with anger when he saw dozens of Achaques rushing towards Sun Sunday and the other 2. Who allowed you to offend my subordinates? The next moment, Harrible's spiritual pressure almost burst out, and the white-boned giant sword in his hand swept towards the group of Achaques, where the tip of the giant sword passed through the air. A huge amount of scorching water that was almost impossible to appear in a desert environment swept out. Scorching sea current. Unlike the black fog at Bylajin, the extremely hot water flow seemed to raise the temperature of the cold Hukomundo wherever it passed. The moment some Achaques who were unable to dodge touched the scorching sea current, the corresponding parts were almost instantly melted. However, at this moment, a large piece of black fog enveloped Harrible from behind, and the shadow cast by the raised giant axe almost completely enveloped Harrible. It's over, Harrible, take your stupidity and be completely devoured by me. As the voice reached Harrible's ears, the giant axe wrapped in the corrupt black fog suddenly fell. Chapter 288 Terrible Corruption Ability. The next moment, under the angry and anxious gazes of Sun, Apache, and Myra, Harrible was chopped and flew out like a rag. Master Harrible. Boom. In the end, Harrible flew dozens of meters in a row until he hit a rather sturdy and strangely shaped dead tree, and then he suddenly stopped. But even so, Harrible still spit out a mouthful of blood under this huge impact. What's worse is, Harrible looked down at the giant sword in his hand that was quickly decayed and broken, and the wound on his chest that was stained with the smell of decay. That wound is very small. But when Harrible used all his spiritual pressure to try to expel a trace of decayed black mist wrapped around the wound, it had no effect at all. That extremely weak wisp of black mist quickly decayed Harrible's spirit body with the wound as the center. Bylajin walked slowly towards Harrible, his hollow eyes seemed to be looking down at Harrible arrogantly, and he spoke. Don't worry, you'll die slowly in decay, and then the remaining spirit and soul will completely become a part of the great king of Hukomundo. This is also that greatest mercy given to you, who is also vast odd. The great king of Hukomundo. Harrible, who gradually felt that his chest seemed to have lost consciousness in decay, stopped struggling and leaned against the dead tree behind him with complete relaxation. His green eyes were like a calm pool of water and spoke. A despicable person who attacks from behind, a shameful person who threatens others with his subordinates, a coward who fears anyone who may challenge his rule, can he be called the king of Hukomundo? In an instant, Bailajan's movements froze, and the black mist on his body seemed to stagnate for a moment. What followed was anger. Bailajan exuded a terrifying spiritual pressure, and then in front of Hannibal, he turned to the group of Cheng-ge's behind him and ordered, "Tear those three Cheng-ge's into pieces bit by bit in front of Hannibal, you." Hannibal was almost instinctively angry when he heard this, and subconsciously wanted to get up. However, at this moment, Hannibal suddenly felt that his shoulder seemed to be pressed down by something, stopping Hannibal's movement. The next moment, a voice that seemed gentle and calm sounded behind Hannibal. "Don't move, otherwise there will be no hope." Hannibal turned his head in shock and looked behind him, only to see that the dead tree he was leaning against seemed to slowly appear a figure. The figure was almost humanoid, wearing a grey cloak, a mask on his face obliquely covering most of his facial features, and black hair draped behind his back to his waist. Hollow. But why can't I feel the spiritual pressure at all? The sudden appearance of this uninvited guest made Bailajan and Hannibal a little slow to react. Before Hannibal could ask, the figure bent down, and the white hand that was originally on Hannibal's shoulder slowly groped down to his chest. Hannibal. "Wait, you." Just when Hannibal subconsciously wanted to speak, the hand suddenly pressed on the rotten wound in the gully between the two holy words. Hannibal was startled and reminded him quickly. "Break the arm quickly." That is Bailajan's rotten ability. Anyone who is contaminated will be completely rotten, but Bailajan's skull face had a hint of human amusement, as if he had seen a big joke and commented, "How stupid. You actually took the initiative to touch my decayed aura." However, before Bailajan could finish, Senju Cheng pressed his palm on Hannibal's chest, kneaded it, and pinched it. In an instant, the decayed aura that had almost penetrated into Hannibal's chest was completely pulled out by Senju Cheng's fingertips. Among them, Hannibal felt the most obvious. His chest, which had completely lost all consciousness, almost instantly felt the warmth left by Senju Cheng's palm. As for Bailajan, he was undoubtedly in unprecedented shock. With his spirit body in contact with the decayed aura, and there seemed to be no signs of decay at all. How is it possible? You know, Bailajan hides a biggest secret that has never been told to anyone, that is, even Bailajan's own spirit body is completely unable to withstand the erosion of the decayed aura. Therefore, Bailajan is particularly cautious every time he uses the decayed aura, for fear that his own spirit body will be contaminated with the decayed aura and completely corroded and aged. Senju Cheng's hand holding the decayed black mist was raised in front of his eyes. His white and slender fingers formed an extremely strong contrast with the decayed black mist. Senju Cheng looked at the decayed breath from a close distance, and couldn't help but sigh in his heart that this decayed breath was really terrible. From the perspective of the microscopic world of spirit particles, the decayed breath almost made the spirit particles age madly from the level of spirit particles. With the knowledge of spirit bodies that Senju Cheng knew, there was absolutely no spirit body that could forcibly withstand this decayed breath and not die. The top vast top-level Great Hollows in Hukomundo couldn't do it, the captains of the 13th Squadron couldn't do it, and even the spirit body of Unohana-sensei, who Senju Cheng had studied for a long time, couldn't do it. Of course, the ultimate spirit body possessed by Senju Cheng is an exception, and Senju Cheng has not yet been able to analyze and study the exception. However, this does not mean that this decaying breath is not dangerous and threatening to Senju Cheng. Senju Cheng's internal organs are still fragile normal spirits. Once he inhales this decaying breath, then, Senju Cheng is likely to become an empty shell with only the ultimate spirit body left in just a few breaths, and he will need to lie dead without the ability to move, while spending a lot of energy to reconstruct his spirit organs. Therefore, Senju Cheng took a light breath, and then blew towards the decayed breath in his hand in front of Bailajan's face, who in Bailajan's eyes whose worldview has almost completely collapsed. The terrible decayed breath was so lightly blown away by the mysterious existence that suddenly appeared. Dang, the giant axe in Bailajan's hand, which symbolized hegemony and power, slipped from his hand and fell on the desert. There was a crisp sound when the iron chain at the end of the giant axe collided. Chapter 289. Born from a dead tree? This abnormality also attracted the attention of Senju Cheng, who turned his gaze towards Bailajan. This plain glance alone made Bailajan's spirit stiffen, and he felt as if the joints of his skeleton were stuck, unable to move. As for the giant axe that had fallen on the desert, Bailajan didn't know whether to pick it up again. If he picked it up, it would be a bit embarrassing. If he didn't pick it up, Bailajan felt that he was facing this terrifying existence that could ignore the smell of decay with empty hands, and he always felt that this would not be very safe for the life of the king of Hukomundo. However, the series of small actions by Byakugan, Haribel and Senju Cheng did not affect the group of Uchica's hollows on the other side at all. Under Byakugan's order, the group of Uchica's hollows, numbering nearly 100, frantically launched a siege on Sunday's Sun, Apache and Myra. Although Sun, Apache, and Myra were direct subordinates of Haribel, a vast top-level Great Hollow, their own combat power was only average at the Uchica's level. Moreover, Sun, Apache, and Myra had already suffered multiple injuries. Facing the siege of the Uchica's hollows, they were almost visibly defeated and were about to be torn into pieces by the Uchica's hollows. Sun, Apache, Myra. Haribel, who had not yet fully reacted to the palm of Senju Cheng's hand that had originally stayed on his chest, almost instinctively struggled to get up and wanted to rescue his subordinates. "Let me do it, Haribel," Senju Cheng said, and the calm and gentle voice made Haribel subconsciously trust him. The next moment, as Senju Cheng's palm pressed against the dead tree behind him, boom 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 boom. In an instant, among the large group of Uchica's hollows, countless unique dead trees of Hutomundo broke through the sand, instantly forming a large forest of dead trees that almost covered the entire Uchica's hollows, and isolated and protected Sun, Apache, and Myra. "What is this? Ah. Damn, it hurts. Something came out of nowhere and poked me down there. I think it seems quite comfortable," and this sudden appearance of white dead trees almost instinctively caused the Uchica's hollows to counterattack and destroy. However, to the surprise of all the Uchica's, this existence that seemed to be exactly the same as the dead trees that were common in Hutomundo was unexpectedly hard. Not to mention sweeping across a large forest of dead trees, even a random small branch often required an Uchica's to hit with all its strength to destroy it. The gentle Senju Cheng was controlling the dead wood, tying up Sun, Apache, and Myra in a relatively comfortable way, and then dragged them out of the dead wood forest and placed them next to Haribel. Then, Senju Cheng looked at the nearly 100 Uchica's hollows who were in the still-growing dead wood forest but did not know how to escape as soon as possible, and a ray of murderous intent flashed in his eyes. In the past, the giant tree form that Senju Cheng showed in Soul Society was just that Senju Cheng deliberately maintained the appearance of this inconspicuous common wood. In essence, this is undoubtedly an offensive and defensive ability form of spirit control, which compress and reorganizes the spirit particles. Therefore, these dead trees that look no different from the fragile dead trees in Hutomundo are essentially composed entirely of Senju Cheng's abilities. As early as when Haribel and Byakugan had a direct conflict, Senju Cheng had already absorbed the rich spirit particles in Hutomundo in advance to prepare. For Senju Cheng, the amount of spirit particles under his control is the increased combat power. Seeing these Uchica's hollows who were unaware of the danger and did not escape from the deadwood forest at the first time, Senju Cheng even had the idea of annihilating them all. In this way, not to mention completely annihilating the Uchica's in Hutomundo at once, but also completely eradicating the power under Byakugan. Even if Aizen Sasuke had some hidden plan, it would be meaningless without Byakugan and the Uchica's under his command as pawns. However, this idea was undoubtedly quite crazy and bold for Senju Cheng. Once upon a time, Senju Cheng almost died under the hollow flash of a mere Uchica's, and now he actually had the idea of annihilating nearly 100 Uchica's at once. However, despite this crazy idea, Senju Cheng subconsciously felt that he might not be able to do it. With the group of Uchica's already surrounded, what Senju Cheng feared least was a war of attrition and a positional war. As long as Senju Cheng was not defeated instantly, the situation would undoubtedly continue to tilt towards Senju Cheng. Hundreds. Thinking about the fact that he had fought to death with nearly 100 Uchica's in the deadwood forest, Senju Cheng inexplicably felt a bit of anticipation and excitement for this crazy idea. Want to try it? Senju Cheng subconsciously wanted to push his glasses, until he touched the mask made of spirit particles on his face, and then he realized that in order to hide his true face, his appearance had been disguised to a certain extent. At this moment, Byakugan finally chose to quietly bend down and pick up the giant axe at the moment when Senju Cheng's eyes moved away, and then spoke in a solemn tone with a bit of caution. "Who are you?" Senju turned his head to Byakugan, looking at the person who posed the greatest threat to him. As Byakugan asked this question, Haribel, who was originally checking Sun, Apache and Myra, subconsciously turned his head to look at Senju beside him. In Haribel's view, Senju was extremely mysterious and powerful. Senju pondered for a moment, then answered calmly. "I? An existence born from dead trees in every corner of Hutomundo. Judging by common reason and common sense, perhaps it can also be called a hollow. Born from dead trees, hollow. When these words came out, even Bailijin, who ruled countless people in Hukomundo, was confused. Even if there is no compulsory education for hollows in Hukomundo, all cognition is based entirely on their own experiences. However, Bailijin knew very well that these dead trees that appeared on the surface of the desert actually had their real roots extending from the giant trees in the Great Hollow Forest. As for where the roots of those giant trees came from, Bailijin had no idea. And, could the void be formed in this way? For the first time, Bailijin felt that as a skeleton, his brain was more or less insufficient. Something seemed to be wrong, and it seemed very strange. Chapter 290 Threat. In fact, what Senju Cheng said was of course nonsense, but it was not completely nonsense. For normal hollows, almost all of them are born after the death of humans, and they have attachments in their hearts, which causes the chains representing the soul to corrode and collapse into a hollow hole, and eventually turn into a hollow that has lost its heart and instinctively devours other souls to fill its own emptiness. The so-called lowest level Great Hollow, Killian, is formed by a particularly strong hollow devouring the spiritual power of hundreds of ordinary hollows. The appearance of the Killians is almost exactly the same, and the spiritual pressure is so huge that it is close to the level of vice captains, and most of them will lose their self-awareness at this stage, and replace it with a chaotic consciousness similar to that of a beast, and those who are higher than Killian will be great hollows of the level of a Chakase and Vastold. However, in the records of the Soul Society, not all hollows are born from the souls of humans after death, and there are also some hollows that are specially formed. Therefore, it is not impossible for Senju Cheng to lie that he is a hollow born in a dead tree. However, for Bailijin, the most important thing is not where Senju Cheng was born, but the ability of Senju Cheng that seems to be immune to decay, natural enemy. Monster. Bailijin's spiritual pressure is almost always on the verge of an explosion. As the king of Hukomundo who has ruled Hukomundo for thousands of years, Bailijin will never allow such an existence to appear. This is an unreasonable threat to Bailijin as the king of Hukomundo. However, the black mist on Bailijin's body condensed slightly, and the skull jaw with no expression at all opened and closed, but the voice suddenly became enthusiastic and said, "When did such a vast appear in Hukomundo? This is undoubtedly a good thing for Hukomundo." After a pause, Bailijin sighed and said, "It just so happens that I am worried about the Soul Society's group of Shinigami sending an expeditionary force to invade Hukomundo again and massacre hollows. If you join the Soul Society to deal with the expeditionary force, then the hollows in Hukomundo will no longer have to worry about the threat from the Soul Society. Expeditionary force, invade Hukomundo and massacre hollows?" Senju Cheng's mouth, which was covered by the mask, twitched slightly, and he felt a sense of both laughter and tears for an inexplicable moment. It was as if Wutalang found out that he was cuckolded and asked Shimin Dakyunran for help, begging Shimin Dakyunran to help catch the adulterer. What's more, Senju Cheng was used to the position of being a Shinigami, so Bailijin's words that seemed to worry about the country and the people could not arouse Senju Cheng's empathy at all. Then, as the thoughts in Senju Cheng's mind kept turning, he was also quickly planning to forge a corresponding personality, position, and way of thinking for his temporarily fabricated identity, Soul Society. Shinigami. What is that? Senju Cheng asked in a tone that seemed a little puzzled. "Sir, your excellency doesn't know?" Bailijin was stunned. "I sleep in the dead tree, unaware of the changes of time, and occasionally wake up, but the night sky remains the same, so it shouldn't change much, right?" Senju Cheng answered in a voice mixed with vicissitudes and calmness. After a pause, Senju Cheng looked at Bailijin and asked, "The god of death is slaughtering the hollows? Very cruel?" Bailijin heard this and answered excitedly. "Cruel. Especially cruel." Under Bailijin's gaze, Senju Cheng pondered for a moment and asked, "More cruel than you who constantly kill and devour other hollows?" This statement almost made Bailijin speechless. In the internal ecology of the Hukomundo, which is more cruel than the law of the Dark Forest, each hollow is a hunter and prey relationship with each other. Therefore, for the hollows, the threat posed by the expeditionary corps sent by the Seireitei is essentially no different from other hollows. However, Bailijin looked at Senju Cheng's seemingly clear and calm eyes and said without hesitation, "Of course, the struggle between hollows is purely for survival and evolution, but those expeditionary forces are slaughtering Hukomundo indiscriminately." After a pause, Bailijin said in a helpless tone, "It is precisely to stop the evil deeds of the expeditionary forces that I tried to unite with Haribal and plan to use Haribal's power to protect Hukomundo." Makatao Senju. If Makatao Senju didn't know a lot about Bulagan, he might have believed a little bit of the words of this king of Hukomundo, who has always been insidious and cunning. However, before Makatao Senju could figure out how to deal with Bulagan, although the wound on his chest was so severe that his internal organs were faintly visible, Haribal still stood up and stood beside Makatao Senju and said, "My lord, don't believe Bulagan. This great king of Hukomundo has never considered confronting the Seireitei head-on. Everything he does is only to maintain his rule over Hukomundo." Then, Haribal raised the white-boned giant sword in his hand and pointed it directly at Bulagan. "Bulagan, don't think I don't know that you plan to join forces with me, but you plan to use my power to deal with another newly rising king. Although I have not seen the other king who is occasionally rumored, I believe that he will not be worse than you anyway, so why do you think I will join forces with you?" In an instant, although Bulagan's skull face could not show any expression, the black fog around Bulagan suddenly became much thicker, which undoubtedly showed Bulagan's mood. He. Lee. Bell. Bulagan gritted his teeth and groaned. His tone was full of anger and murderous intent. In Bulagan's view, Senju Makatao has a faint possibility of being persuaded, whether it is to take the opportunity to appease Senju Makatao to stay under his command, and then let Apollo Grant study the relevant abilities of Senju Makatao to be immune to decay, or to trick Senju Makatao into attacking the Expeditionary Corps and eliminate this hidden danger with the help of the power of the 13th Division of the Gotti. Then, several thoughts floated in Bulagan's mind. After a few breaths, Bulagan stared deeply at Senju Makatao, whose spiritual pressure could not be sensed. Caution and fear undoubtedly overwhelmed Bulagan's killing intent. Especially since Bulagan knew that Senju Makatao is immune to the decay ability, the fear and hesitation that kept sprouting in his heart were also urging Bulagan to stay away from him. "Haribal, some things are far from as shallow as you see." Then, after leaving these words, Bulagan left with his giant axe. As Bulagan left, the group of Uchica's hollows that was still in the Deadwood Forest also hurriedly left the Deadwood Forest and followed Bulagan's direction. Chapter 291 Someone Cares About You. Senju Makatao watched the Uchica's escape from the Deadwood Forest. His eyes flickered obscurely, but he still suppressed the idea of controlling the Deadwood Forest to start strangling the Uchica's hollows. After all, even if Senju Makatao really killed all the Uchica's, it would take a lot of time, and the noise caused might even alarm the Expeditionary Corps or Aizen Sosok. Moreover, although Bulagan's behavior seemed to have no courage and guts as the king of Hukomundo, and he chose to give in front of Senju Makatao, however, Senju Makatao had to admit that Bulagan's decay ability was quite unsolvable and terrifying, and Senju Makatao even had the opportunity to completely eliminate this almost absolute ability to avoid possible threats to Unohana teacher in the future. In addition, Senju Makatao was also very clear about his current situation. Being entangled by the decayed aura at close range and accidentally inhaling it into his internal organs would also cause the parts that had not yet completed the ultimate spirit to be completely decayed. Death, not to the point of death, but it would take a long time to lie dead, which was something that Makatao Senju could not accept at this point. Under various risks, Makatao Senju had to give up the tempting idea. Half a day later, in a cave not far from the battle point between Haribal and Bulagan. Although Bulagan was forced to give in front of Makatao Senju, both Haribal and her three Uchikas were seriously injured. Once Makatao Senju left them alone, I am afraid that a few wild Uchikas might threaten them. Moreover, Makatao Senju also had some special ideas about Haribal, who seemed to uphold the belief of sacrifice, otherwise he would not have appeared to save Haribal. Of course, the special idea that Makatao Senju referred to was, to treat Haribal as a chess piece. Even if Aizen Sosok did not rule Hukomundo and establish the 10 blades under his influence, Haribal was undoubtedly a real Vasto-level hollow, with combat power beyond the general captain level. More importantly, Senju Makatao is also leaving a way out for himself. If the fact that he planted the seeds of the Seireitei is completely exposed, he will most likely be sentenced to death by the Central 46th Chamber. At the time, with the assistance of Haribal, Senju Makatao can also use the Yanti membrane to forcibly bring Senju Makatao back to Hukomundo from Soul Society like Aizen Sosok in the original trajectory. Well, in short, it will be right to walk a little more of the paths that Aizen Sosok has verified and leave Aizen Sosok with no way out. Although Senju Makatao is unlikely to reveal his way out in front of Haribal, his superb medical skills and understanding of spirits are still enough for Senju Makatao to be competent in dealing with injuries. After Senju Cheng quickly treated the injuries of the three Uchikas, the only one left was Haribal's wound. Senju Cheng had stripped off the decayed aura in time. Although Haribel's original wound looked extremely horrible, even if the hollow itself did not have the ability of super speed regeneration, it also had a strong self-healing ability. Therefore, when Senju Cheng squatted in front of Haribel and stared at Haribel's chest with a focused and serious look, he was shocked to find that Haribel's original wound, which almost showed his internal organs, had begun to heal itself. Being observed so closely by Senju Cheng, although there was no extra ethical emotion in the Hollow's worldview, Haribel still felt a little uncomfortable for some reason and said, "Sir, my injury seems to be no big deal, so I won't bother you to help me deal with it." "No. How can this be?" Senju Cheng heard this and blurted out this sentence almost subconsciously. "I have worked so hard for so long, just for this moment, you tell me that it is incurable?" For Senju Cheng, this kind of rejection is no less than dating, chatting, eating and watching movies with a female netizen. The whole process has been completed, and even the pants are almost taken off, but the female netizen is almost ready to leave. "Sorry, I am Senju Cheng. No medical patient who has been targeted by me has ever left without treatment. This kind of thing must be broadcast no matter what. Not broadcasting it is absolutely not possible." What's more, Senju Cheng has studied a large number of spirits of the gods of death, and has also studied the spirits of the Ichika's level hollows on Synopsis, but it is the first time that Senju Cheng has encountered a number of rare hollows of the level of vast odd. As a doctor who is willing to make progress, how could Senju Cheng suppress his restless heart and be able to ignore Haribel as if he had nothing and remain calm? Otherwise, why didn't Senju Cheng save the beauty before Haribel was injured, but waited abruptly until Haribel was infected with the smell of decay and appeared only when the situation reached the most critical moment? Haribel was not injured and did not bleed, so what reason did Senju Cheng have to take the opportunity to help her heal? For what, wasn't it to take the opportunity to study Haribel and South Seeds? Hearing Senju Cheng's tone that seemed to not allow rejection, Haribel could not help but be slightly stunned, feeling that the Senju Cheng in front of him seemed to be somewhat different from the calm and gentle posture just now. "Why?" Haribel's green eyes looked at Senju Cheng and asked. Senju Cheng's thoughts turned rapidly, and he began to treat Haribel's injuries without any hesitation or pause, and then answered in a calm and gentle voice. "Just like a heart that needs to be comforted when it is injured, a body that is injured must also be treated." After a pause, Senju Cheng looked up and looked at Haribel, and then said, "It has nothing to do with the effect. What's more important is to tell your body. Someone cares about you." In an instant, Haribel's green eyes trembled fiercely, and the empty and dead heart that belonged to the void suddenly produced a strange throbbing. Everything in front of him, whether it was the surrounding scenery, the flowing air, or the pair of calm and gentle eyes in front of him, seemed to be completely frozen in Haribel's heart. While Haribel seemed to be completely stunned, Senju Cheng completely seized this opportunity and continued to treat the wound on Haribel's chest. It was that Haribel's holy text seemed too huge, which caused a considerable degree of hindrance to Senju Cheng's treatment of the injury, resulting in insufficient efficiency. However, Senju Cheng, the seed of the forest, had undoubtedly been integrated into Haribel's body at the first time. The rest is to study the spirit belonging to Vostok carefully. P.S. There are a lot of chores today, so I'll take a leave and there will only be 2 updates. Sorry. Chapter 292 Ashwari Cheng Vastode, theoretically, is the highest level that a hollow can eventually evolve to. Different from the almost uniform appearance and chaotic consciousness of Jillian. And also different from the unstable state of Yurikeis who are generally gigantic and present an animalistic appearance, Vastode-level hollows will present a nearly humanoid posture as a whole, and will not degenerate back to the Yurikeis level under normal circumstances, and already have a more complete personal consciousness. In the eyes of Senju Cheng, the evolution of hollows is like a process of pursuing self. From the chaotic and beardless consciousness to the unstable animal nature, and finally stepping into the human form to pursue the ultimate self. However, what makes Senju Cheng a little puzzled is that in the records of Soul Society, there has never been a hollow that can fill the hollow hole representing the emptiness of its own soul. Even a hollow at the level of Vastode still has the common characteristics of hollows. Hollow hole and mask. The secret of the spirit of Vastode-level hollows has also slowly unfolded in front of Senju Cheng through Haribel. First of all, there is no doubt about it. Vostok's spirit body has a higher spirit particle mass, a tighter spirit particle arrangement, a more complex spirit particle structure, and a part of the structure similar to that of the god of death. Senju Cheng's eyes flashed obscurely, and he was undoubtedly quite shocked by this discovery, and this part of the structure was extremely familiar to Senju Cheng. Because, this part of the structure in the body of the god of death, is the part closely related to the zanpakutō. Wait, is this the reason why Vastot's level of hollows have the possibility of self-arrensay? Senju Makotao thought about it and was fascinated for a while, staring at the wound of Haribal in front of him with a burning gaze, trying to use this wound that could vaguely see Haribal's internal organs to see more things. Even before Senju Makotao inadvertently, he used his hands to push the two obstructive soft tissues next to the wound to the sides a little. This action also brought Haribal, who was originally immersed in the words "someone cares about you," back to his senses, and instinctively made a strange whimper. In an instant, in this rather tempting voice, Senju Makotao quickly restored the image of a pure and kind doctor, temporarily suppressed that part of his doubts, and refocused on treating Haribal's wound. And Haribal, during the whole process, it seemed that Senju Makotao was completely treating this as Senju Makotao's expression of caring for the void. The whole process was just leaning against the rock wall, with his face turned to the side, allowing Senju Makotao to do it. Okay, soon, under Senju Makotao's treatment of the wound, Haribal's original scary wound on his chest was perfectly treated. Haribal, who was not good at speaking, reached out and touched his chest, as if he had no idea what to say. His golden eyelashes blinked, and he just responded with a and stopped talking. As for Senju Makotao, this was undoubtedly the first time that Senju Makotao was alone with such a mature and beautiful woman, out of the scope of Unohana teacher's intervention. Especially, the other party was a hollow. However, Senju Makotao had to admit that compared with the relatively complex emotions of the Shinigami, perhaps due to the lack of inner heart, even Haribal, who was a vast level hollow, still had a cold and indifferent look. This made Haribal's temperament look completely different from the charm of female Shinigami, like an iceberg, and like an existence that didn't know how to approach its own kind. In an instant, Senju Makotao felt a sense of excitement inexplicably. Of course, the source of this excitement was that Senju Makotao, as an ordinary vice-captain Shinigami, secretly disguised his identity and was alone with a vast level hollow. From the perspective of the general values of the GOTY 13, this situation was no less than Jiraiya of Konoha village sneaking under the bed of Kaguya Otsutsuki. After a moment, Haribal seemed to have thought of something and spoke. "Thank you, you saved me. I will find a way to repay your kindness." After a pause, before Senju Makotao could speak, Haribal stretched out his hand to Senju Makotao and said, "To Haribal. This is my name." Senju Makotao also stretched out his hand and shook Haribal's hand, and replied, "Yunchen, Yunchen." Haribal's mouth moved slightly, as if he had repeated it several times secretly, and then said in a somewhat solemn tone, "I will always remember this name, Yunchen." Senju Makotao heard this and felt Haribal's attempt to express goodwill, but in a somewhat embarrassed and helpless way of communication. He smiled gently, took the initiative to take over the topic, and said, "There is no need to remember deliberately. After becoming friends, the name will naturally be deeply engraved in the soul and will never be forgotten." Friends? Haribal thought for a while and said, "Like the relationship between me and Sun, Apache, Myra and the others. But, I don't feel the same way with you. It's normal to have some differences. After all, Sun and the others are probably more like subordinates you protect." Senju Makotao replied. Haribal's beautiful green eyes revealed a look of understanding, and then nodded. As he continued to chat with Haribal, Senju Makotao felt that Haribal's vigilance had been further relaxed, so he turned to ask, "Haribal, do you know about Arensei?" To Senju Makotao's surprise, Haribal nodded and said, "Yes, I once met a successful Arensei named Vastod. He told me that as long as the Arensei succeeds, even if he doesn't devour other hollows at all, he can become stronger through training and further find his lost heart." Senju Makotao heard this and asked subconsciously, "Koirate Stark?" Haribal shook his head and said, "No, that Vastod's name is Neliel Duwad of Sevenk. P.S. Let me explain here that many people know that Stark is an autonomous Arensei, so he ranks no. 1 among the 10 Espartas. However, it seems that in the official setting, Nel is also a true autonomous Arensei, and Ilkira is a semi-autonomous Arensei. I hope to know more about this." This name also made Makotao Senju subconsciously think of the appearance of the legitimate hollow that is truly Karuk. And similar to Haribal, Nel also does not like to fight, does not like to devour her own kind, and is a rare kind-hearted representative among the hollows. What surprised Makotao Senju was that Nel was also a Vastod who succeeded in autonomous Arensei. In this way, Nel at this stage is undoubtedly closer to humans than Haribal. Chapter 293. Can the void be filled? After all, even though Hannibal is now a vast old-level hollow, with a body shape similar to that of a human, it is inevitable that many parts of his body are still covered with a bone shell. As for the appearance that is truly similar to that of a human being and is more than 90% similar, it is the appearance that a hollow can only have after successfully becoming an Seireitei. After Hannibal answered, he seemed to have thought of something and asked Senju Cheng, have you also succeeded in becoming an Seireitei? Senju did not answer the question directly, but asked with a more intimate name between friends. Tia, do you want to become an Seireitei? Have more complete emotions, and from then on you don't need to become stronger by devouring, and you don't need to endure the weak state caused by not devouring a hollow for a long time. Hannibal's green eyes flashed with some waves, and asked, is it okay? If I'm not sure, how can I say it? Senju replied with a smile. As if out of some trust, Hannibal did not ask Senju how sure he was, but asked with some hope. After becoming an Seireitei, can the hollow that represents the lack in the heart be filled? This, Senju obviously didn't know the answer to this question. When his eyes fell on Hannibal, he suddenly thought of a question that he had overlooked and asked. Where is your hollow? After all, Hannibal's clothes were scarce, and Senju eyes had quietly wandered around Hannibal for several circles, but he didn't find the location of Hannibal's hollow at all. When Hannibal heard this, he almost subconsciously understood that Senju could fill his hollow. Immediately, Hannibal stood up and lifted one of the few pieces of cloth on his body in front of Senju. In an instant, even Senju, who was well informed, had a slightly ruddy face. Before he could react and continue to stare at Hannibal, his head had already moved to one side. How could there be a hollow in the uterus of the lower abdomen? Cheng, can you really help me fill the hollow? Hearing Hannibal's calm voice asking, even though he knew that this was just a normal exchange, Senju mind was unconsciously dragged into the car and driven violently. It can't be filled, Senju tone rarely showed a bit of shyness and embarrassment, and he explained again and again. I can, my ability is limited, I can't do this kind of thing for the time being. When Hannibal heard this, his green eyes instinctively revealed a bit of disappointment. For vast level hollows, most of them have realized the lack of their hearts, and instinctively tried to fill the lack of their hearts and find their true selves. Filling hollows, this is a figurative description for vast level hollows, representing the filling of the missing part of the heart. Then, Hannibal suddenly noticed the abnormal redness on Senju face, and subconsciously leaned over to observe Senju and asked, Cheng, why do you have this expression? Well, nothing, Senju continued to tilt his head and answered awkwardly. That's right, don't show the location of your hollow to others easily in the future. Don't worry, you are the only hollow who knows the location of the hollow besides me. After a pause, Hannibal said with a little more envy in his calm tone. Is this the posture after becoming an Seireitei? Cheng, I feel a lot of emotions in you. This change in your rosy face should be shyness, right? As he spoke, Hannibal's eyes revealed envy, and he unconsciously continued to move closer to Senju face, as if he wanted to further observe the changes in Senju rosy face. However, this was undoubtedly a very exciting torture for Senju. Not to mention that Hannibal was so close, Senju could almost see any subtle changes on that calm and delicate face, the trembling of golden eyelashes, the flow of green eyes, and the warm airflow of breath. More importantly, Hannibal's obviously foul holy text was so striking under this leaning action that it was obvious that it had a clear impact. This made the innocent and kind little death god Senju head turn pale slightly under the close approach of the vast old-level hollow. While the lower body was completely stiff, the upper body subconsciously leaned back to keep a distance from Hannibal. However, Hannibal was still subconsciously approaching. The next moment, the somewhat slow-witted Hannibal felt a weight on the front half of her body, and she subconsciously fell into Senju arms because she was leaning forward too much. Hannibal instinctively reached out and suddenly grasped a hard object from Senju through his cloak. It looked like a stick, or a column. What puzzled Hannibal the most was that it was very hard, very hard. Hannibal looked up and looked at Senju, who had a dull expression, and asked calmly with a hint of doubt. What is this? Is it something that will be produced after becoming an Seireitei? Senju eyes flashed with a hint of panic, and his mind turned rapidly. Oops, I've been discovered. Am I going to expose the fact that I'm not a hollow? You know, hollows don't have this kind of thing. Wait, then, Senju eyes stabilized, nodded, and answered. Ah, yes, that's right. This is something that will be produced after becoming an Arensei. As Senju Cheng spoke, he opened his cloak, took out the zanpakutō held by Haribal, and explained. After the Arensei, the power of the hollow will be condensed and sealed into a core to exist in the form of a zanpakutō. It is precisely because of this that it can constantly change by training the power of the zanpakutō, without having to continue to devour its own kind. After a pause, Senju Cheng said. "You must have seen the existence of a zanpakutō on Nel Duo Shivank, right?" "I have seen it," Haribal nodded, but his palm suddenly reached into the gap in Senju Cheng's cloak, and then directly touched Senju Cheng's skin for a moment. Then, Haribal quickly retracted his palm and put it to his nose, as if he was sniffing something, and stated in a calm tone. "Ashwayunchen, I just smelled a breath different from that of a hollow when you lifted your cloak. Is that the smell of the god of death? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novel, as there you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 294. Haribal considers the long term. However, when Haribal continued to smell the scent on his palm, a trace of doubt flashed across his eyes. This was the breath of the Great Hollow, and Haribal smelled the breath on his palm, as if he was smelling the breath of another self, and subconsciously felt close to it. Witnessing the change in Haribal's eyes, Senju Cheng's eyes flashed a little fluctuation. How could Senju Cheng, who has always been cautious, leave such a flaw? After Senju Cheng conducted a preliminary study on Haribal's spirit body belonging to Vastod, Senju Cheng quietly passed the spiritual control ability and temporarily created a layer of Vastod's spirit layer invisible to the naked eye on the surface of his own spirit body. Therefore, it is impossible to identify Senju Cheng's identity by conventional verification methods. Then, Senju Cheng asked with some doubts. "What are you talking about?" "Tia." Haribal explained quickly. "I'm sorry, Ashwayunchen, I just smelled the breath of the god of death on you, and I thought you were the god of death." "Breath?" Senju Cheng's expression seemed to have thought of something, and he said with sudden enlightenment. "The cloak and clothes on me were picked up accidentally in Huko Mundo. Could it be because their original owner was the god of death?" Hearing this, the last trace of doubt in Haribal's heart was completely dispelled, and Senju Cheng asked in a joking way. "Tia, if I were the god of death, you wouldn't have attacked me just now, right?" "No," Haribal shook his head without hesitation, and then answered. "But in this case, I may need to rethink the way I get along with you." "What do you mean?" Senju Cheng asked with some doubt. "The pursuit of sacrifice must inevitably require the price of sacrifice," Haribal set his own philosophy and continued. "I don't intend to reject friends because of Ashwayunchen's change of identity, so making friends with the god of death will undoubtedly require the price of sacrifice. I don't think I can live long in the Soul Society." Senju Cheng. "Wait, what is Haribal thinking about? We are just friends, so it is not necessary to express the feeling of eloping with me to the Soul Society and being ready to fight to the death if found in the Soul Society. Haribal's thoughts and awareness about sacrifice, is it so long-term?" Ahem, Senju Cheng coughed a few times, took back the zanpakutō that Haribal was holding and stroking back and forth in his palm, and then stood up and asked. "I can indeed try to assist you in the Arensei based on my own experience in the Arensei. Are you willing to give it a try?" Haribal said in a solemn and serious tone, looking directly at Senju Cheng. "I'm willing." "Okay." Senju Cheng tried hard to ignore the strange feeling, and nodded instead. He was about to start assisting Haribal in the Arensei immediately, and took the opportunity to further study Haribal's spirit. Of course, Senju Cheng was not completely fooling about assisting Haribal in the Arensei. After observing that there is a part of the structure similar to the god of death in the body of Haribal, a Vastod-level hollow, combined with the theory of Arensei, Senju has a corresponding idea about how to Arensei. Perhaps, without the Hinyu, Senju can't do a Hinyu transformation like Raisin Sosok did to a large number of Uchikes and even Killian. But the Vastod-level hollow already has the potential to be autonomously Arensei, and all Senju needs to do is to try to push Haribal forward one step. In this way, Haribal, who is autonomously Arensei, will undoubtedly have more powerful power than the original trajectory, which is the way to Arensei with the power of Hinyu. This chess piece that Senju seems to be able to fully control with one step further will also be able to play a greater role. However, at this time point, Makatao Senju almost always needs to consider the factors of Aizen Sosok. In the case of encountering Bailijin, the safer approach is undoubtedly to follow Bailijin. After all, if Aizen Sosok wants to replace Bailijin as the king of Hukomundo, then he can't get around Bailijin no matter what. As long as you stand in front of the finish line and wait for Aizen Sosok, you'll definitely be able to catch Aizen Sosok. This is also the reason why Senju Makatao deliberately created an ignorant character when facing Bailijin's deception, in order to temporarily ally with Bailijin. Now, Senju Makatao is a little hesitant, whether to catch up with Bailijin, or try to help Arable to become an Arensei first. At the same time, in a dead and remote desert in Hukomundo, Aizen Sosok, wearing the 5th squad captain's feather, passed by with a flash without any cover, and then stopped and looked in the direction of the depths of the desert. Ratsu. A shockingly huge Ratsu. In a sense, it is comparable to the Ratsu possessed by Yamamoto Jinrai Shichikuni as understood by Aizen Sosok. Could it be, Bailijin is hiding in this place? Aizen Sosok's eyes moved slightly, and he rushed towards the depths of the desert without hesitation. However, what appeared in front of Aizen Sosok were two figures, one large and one small, wearing simple grey cloaks, seemingly wandering aimlessly in the desert. The image was completely different from the Bailijin that Aizen Sosok knew. One of them looked almost the same as a middle-aged human man, and the other looked like a little human girl wearing a mask. Arensei. A vast old-level hollow with an autonomous Arensei. Almost instantly, Aizen Sosok identified the identities of the two people in front of him, and a hint of interest was clearly revealed in his eyes. The middle-aged man standing in front of Aizen Sosok seemed to have sensed something, and his eyes looked directly at Aizen Sosok, while one hand pulled the little girl who was about to make a fuss behind him, and spoke. Death God. Being able to get close to me without being affected by spiritual pressure, is that the so-called captain-level Death God? I can sense the extremely powerful spiritual pressure hidden in you. The answer is right, but the process is wrong, Aizen Sosok said with a smile on his face. Not every captain-level Death God can possess this level of spiritual pressure. The middle-aged man slowly raised his head, revealing a pair of rather lazy eyes, and asked. I see, then what is your purpose, Death God? If possible, please don't mention fighting. I hate that kind of meaningless behavior, otherwise I will ask you to die here. Hearing this, Aizen Sosok revealed his empty waist and replied. Of course, I don't even have a sword, so I don't plan to engage in a meaningless battle. Chapter 295. Koirate Stark. Really? The middle-aged man, who exuded a terrifying spiritual pressure almost all the time, scratched his messy hair lazily, and then said. In that case, please do as you please. Although this area is affected by my spiritual pressure, no hollow dares to approach within 100 kilometers, and there is nothing interesting. Aizen Sosok pushed his glasses. His expression was not as gentle as in the past in Seireitei, but instead revealed a meaningful smile, and said. Isn't it you, the most interesting one? What do you mean? The middle-aged man raised his eyes. A vast odd-level great hollow, the autonomous Arensei succeeded, but what is puzzling is that the power formed by the Arensei has been given an autonomous consciousness, Aizen Sosok said, while casting his eyes on the hollow who looked like a little girl who was pressed on the back by the middle-aged man. After these words came out, the middle-aged man's expression changed obviously, and he asked in a solemn tone. Who are you? As you guessed, a god of death, named Aizen Sosok. Aizen Sosok spread his hands slightly and answered without disguising, his tone revealing absolute confidence and arrogance. The middle-aged man's eyes sank slightly, and then he spoke. Sharp eyes, see through at a glance, are all god of death as powerful as you? How is it possible? Aizen Sosok subconsciously denied this statement with an arrogant tone, but when the words came to his lips, the shadow of Senju Makatao appeared in his mind, and he said instead. Perhaps, there is another god of death who can do this. Then, Aizen Sosok approached the middle-aged man step by step as if he was defenseless, and asked. What is your name? Koirate Stark. Stark? Aizen Sosok didn't speak until he walked in front of Stark. You are lonely, right? I can understand your thoughts very well. You want to have someone who can walk with you even if you want to divide the power behind the Arensei. Stark stared at Aizen Sosok without saying anything. Aizen Sosok seemed to be looking down at Stark with a look of scrutiny and inquiry, but he had already seen through the autonomous Arensei, vast odd. A poor creature wandering in loneliness, although the hollow will also have a zanpakutō after becoming an Arensei. The zanpakutō of the hollow after becoming an Arensei was completely different from the zanpakutō of the god of death. The Shikai and Bankai of the zanpakutō of the god of death are, in the final analysis, a process of constantly recognizing oneself, unifying and sublimating the power deep in one's soul. The zanpakutō possessed by the Seireitei is a highly summarized and condensed form of the power originally possessed by the hollow itself. However, Stark's behavior of giving his zanpakutō self-awareness after becoming an Seireitei, and even turning the other party into a hollow in the shape of a little girl, in a sense, it is a secondary split of the self that has already been recognized, which is a complete act of self-denial. In this way, the relationship between Stark and his zanpakutō will gradually become confused, right? Not to mention the true sense of exerting the power that he originally possessed. However, Aiden Sosok understands Stark very well. All of this is to end the seemingly endless loneliness, and to have someone to walk with in the long night. Stark, power is only power after all. Even if you give the other party self-awareness and force him to be on an equal footing with you, can his immature thoughts really understand your loneliness and thinking? Aiden Sosok said, but the corners of his mouth inadvertently curved slightly. That subtle expression was clearly captured by Stark, who asked back. Your expression tells me that you seem to be proud of something. A much sharper observation than expected. Aiden Sosok boasted and said. Yes, I was once as lonely as you, but fortunately I found someone who could walk with me in a boring and decaying place. Hearing this, Stark felt the faint satisfaction revealed in Aiden Sosok's tone, and there was a little more envy in his lazy eyes, and then said. So? Aiden Sosok, you specifically told me so much just to show off your fellow travelers? Of course not, Aiden Sosok shook his head and said, I plan to set up an organization composed of Seireiteis. Maybe you are not interested in the meaning of its existence, but you may find fellow travelers worth looking forward to in it, so do you want to come? Coirate Stark. Stark scratched his messy hair subconsciously and said impatiently. This kind of thing sounds very troublesome, and there is a high probability that we will have to fight for it, right? Aiden Sosok did not say anything, but just continued to look at Stark patiently. After hesitating for a moment, Stark stretched out his hand to Aiden Sosok and said. But if there are interesting fellow travelers in it, it seems not bad to participate a little. However, Aiden Sosok took a look at Stark's palm that seemed to be intended to shake hands, but he did not have the slightest intention of extending his hand, and just spoke. As for the handshake, why not wait until you find someone who is your peer among them? Stark's lazy eyes flashed slightly. Although Aiden Sosok's words seemed quite polite, the arrogance hidden in them was unimaginable. You don't think I'm your equal, so you're not interested in shaking hands? How arrogant, Aiden Sosok. This makes me a little interested in the person you think is your peer. Stark's heart was slightly moved, but he didn't get angry. Instead, he said apologetically. Excuse me, I almost forgot that I joined as a subordinate, but if you want to get the loyalty of your subordinates, you also need to have an equal status. Of course, what do you think of the king of Mundo? Aiden Sosok said calmly. Oh? Are you planning to kill Bailajan and become the king of Mundo? Stark asked. Aiden Sosok smiled and answered calmly. No, it's about letting Bailajan, the king of Mundo, become your colleague. That wouldn't be an insult to your strength, would it? For a moment, even Stark couldn't help but feel a little surprised by Aiden Sosok's calm and arrogant tone. Can you do it? Stark raised his eyebrows and asked. That's the wrong question. The correct question is when can we find Bailajan, Aiden Sosok said, and then he led Stark and his zanpakutō manifestation, Lulanet, out of this area. Chapter 296a. Strange feeling. Just as the captains and vice-captains of the expeditionary corps scattered and searched for the reason for the abnormal spiritual pressure reaction of the Cheng-ge in the Mundo. In the Seireitei, the corresponding captains' meeting was held to discuss the corresponding strategy after the intelligence and short messages of the expeditionary corps sent back. The mainstream attitude of the captains' meeting was basically the same as that of Aiden Sosok's judgment. The most core mission of the 13th Division is undoubtedly to protect the safety of the Seireitei at all times, and it can do so at all costs. Therefore, under the premise that a large number of Cheng-ge are hidden and there is a possibility of launching a large-scale invasion of Soul Society, the Seireitei directly entered an emergency state in advance, and strictly ordered each Shinigami to carry a zanpakutō at all times and be ready to enter combat at any time. Regarding the safety of the 3 captains and 5 vice-captains of the Expeditionary Corps, although the captains of the 2nd Division, Seireitei, the captains of the 4th Division, Unohana, and the captain of the 6th Division, Byakuya, all clearly and strongly demanded that reinforcements be prepared as much as possible to respond. However, these proposals were strongly suppressed by the Central 46th Office and the Captain General Yamamoto Seireitei Shibukuni, who believed that there was no extra combat power to be sent to Hukomundo to support the Expeditionary Corps under the premise of absolutely ensuring the safety of the Seireitei. As for the proposal to temporarily withdraw the Expeditionary Corps to the Seireitei, it was also rejected by the Central 46th Office and the Captain General Yamamoto Seireitei Shibukuni, who believed that the Expeditionary Corps staying in Hukomundo could play a great role in restraining the enemy. After the captain's meeting ended, the execution orders announced by the captain's meeting were also sent to each division as soon as possible. Among them, in the 4th Division, after Senju Cheng participated in the Expeditionary Corps to Hukomundo, Aokiriza and Kotetsuya, who actually performed the duties of the vice-captains of the 4th Division, received the execution order. Almost immediately, Aokiriza and Kotetsuya went straight to the Unohana courtyard at the same time. In Unohana Retsu's room, Aokiriza and Kotetsuya saw Unohana Retsu, who looked gentle and calm, quietly sipping tea. Captain Unohana, Aokiriza and Kotetsuya came forward at the same time and handed over the order documents. Before they could finish speaking, Unohana Retsu gently raised his hand to interrupt them and motioned them to sit down. Then, Unohana Retsu asked, "You are all here to ask about vacant, right?" Aokiriza and Kotetsuya nodded subconsciously, and their eyes unconsciously revealed impatience. The order document only described the possibility that the Seireitei might be attacked by a large number of Ichike's hollows, and required each division to be ready for battle at any time in an emergency state. It is conceivable that if the Soul Society could be attacked in this way, how bad would the situation in Hukomundo be? However, the order document did not describe the Rescue Expeditionary Corps at all, nor did it explain the continued withdrawal of Shinigami. Unohana Retsu seemed to see through their thoughts, and his eyes dropped slightly, and he spoke in a calm tone. The Seireitei has no intention of sending reinforcements to the Expeditionary Corps, nor has it issued an order to allow the Expeditionary Corps to withdraw to the Seireitei. Instantly, Aokiriza and Kotetsuya's expressions changed, and they asked in shock. Then, what about Makoto-kun? Has the Seireitei just given up on him? No, Captain Unohana, you have to find a way to bring Vice-Captain Senju back no matter what. Unohana Retsu heard this, raised his eyes, and took in the anxious looks of Aokiriza and Kotetsuya, and spoke in a gentle tone with a little more playfulness. What? Just because you care about Makoto, are you planning to bring him back to the Seireitei? The Expeditionary Corps has thousands of people, and there are 3 captains with higher status among them. Are they just going to ignore him? After a pause, Unohana Retsu did not forget to add a sentence, saying with a bit of sigh. It seems that Makoto is really popular. Not only did Captain Seireitei go against Captain General Yamamoto and ask for help at the captain's meeting, but your attitude is also so firm. Immediately, Aokiriza and Kotetsuya blushed, and realized that their reaction was a little too impatient, completely beyond the concern that subordinates should have for the vice-captain, and even their words had unintentionally revealed their dissatisfaction with the decision of the Seireitei. However, since it was about the safety of Senju Makoto, Aokiriza and Kotetsuya were a little flustered and didn't know how to answer, but they still sat in front of Unohana Retsu with a firm attitude. Makoto, let me see how many connections you have secretly hidden from me in the Seireitei. Unohana Retsu took a sip of tea slowly, his eyes curved gently, thinking secretly, and then spoke to comfort him. Don't worry, the current situation of the Expeditionary Corps is not particularly dangerous, and Makoto stayed in the Expeditionary Corps camp. The 12th Division can also open the interconnected black chambers in the camp at any time. Aokiriza and Kotetsuya heard this, and their expressions relaxed a little. Of course, the reason why Unohana Retsu was so indifferent was also based on his judgment of Senju Makoto's combat power level. Not to mention the zanpakutō abilities that even Unohana Retsu was not fully aware of, just the zanpakutō abilities and kendo level that Senju Makoto showed on the surface. Unohana Retsu was quite sure of one point, that the possibility of the Ichike's level hollow posing a threat to Senju Makoto was very small. Besides, didn't Makoto promise me that he would come back? He is not a man who does not keep his promises. Unohana Retsu, who seemed gentle and calm, thought of this, and his eyes could not help but slightly raise, looking at the flower arrangement work forest and dashi that was almost always in his sight while sipping tea. The daisia flowers are still beautiful, and the green grass around them is still green. After Senju Makoto joined the Expeditionary Corps to Hukomundo, although Unohana Retsu seemed to have no impact, Unohana Retsu no longer chose the best place to drink tea as he did in the past. Instead, he sat in the living room with Forrest and Jutsuya to drink tea. It's just that the environment in Hukomundo is extremely bad. I guess Makoto will be quite uncomfortable and feel a bit lonely and boring, right? Unohana thought silently, his gentle eyes slightly lowered, and for the first time he felt that the passage of time seemed to be much slower than before. This feeling was very strange to Unohana. Perhaps, after Senju Makoto left him for a long time, Unohana suddenly felt a sense of strangeness around him. At the same time, in a hidden cave in Hukomundo, Senju Makoto's hearty laughter echoed in the cave. P.S. There will be another update later, but it will be a little later. Chapter 297. Seireitei Plan. The environment of Hukomundo is undoubtedly unfamiliar and uncomfortable for Makoto Senju, but, in other words, it is also quite fresh. During the short time with Haribal and his party, Makoto Senju occasionally couldn't help but be amused by the 3 roundabout attaques under Haribal's command. Especially in Hukomundo, most of the hollows are quite straightforward, far less complicated than in the Seireitei. Therefore, while ensuring that his identity as a god of death was not discovered, Makoto Senju was quite relaxed when getting along with these hollows with low IQs, and felt like he was letting his brain fly. Those clear eyes that did not contain any wisdom made Makoto Senju subconsciously produce an evaluation. There is a kind of wild and innocent beauty. During this period, Haribal seemed to have unexpectedly high trust in Makoto Senju. After Makoto Senju proposed to assist Haribal in transforming into an Seireitei, Makoto Senju hardly needed any explanation. Haribal would pose in the corresponding posture according to Makoto Senju's request and let Makoto Senju conduct in-depth research without saying a word. Under this cooperation, Makoto Senju's understanding of the spirit of the vasto-level hollow can be said to have made great progress. However, Seireitei was much more difficult than Makoto Senju imagined. In theory, the so-called Seireitei is that the hollow breaks its own mask and highly condenses and compresses the core formed by its own power into a zanpakutō. But in actual operation, not to mention that the whole process requires extremely huge spiritual pressure support, just breaking the mask requires the vasto-level hollow to recognize itself. If Makoto Senju is given enough time, then after verifying various plans, Makoto Senju can naturally find the best way. However, time undoubtedly does not allow. Not only is it impossible for Makoto Senju to stay in Hukomundo for a long time as a member of the Expeditionary Corps, but more importantly, the threat of Aizen Sosok is imminent, and Makoto Senju also does not have such ample time. In this case, Makoto Senju naturally chose a tricky way, that is, to refer to the process of autonomous hollows, and then copy the corresponding process at the level of spirit particles to promote Haribal to autonomous hollows. At present, there are only 2 autonomous hollows known to Makoto Senju in the entire Hukomundo: Koyotai Stark and Nellale Duo Dizavank. Afterwards, after repeated consideration, Makoto Senju gave up the risky plan of tracking Biogen. In the case of the hope of promoting the hollows of Vastod level, Makoto Senju plans to first collect some of the power of Vastod level hollows to prepare for dealing with Aizen Sosok. Since Haribal had seen Nellale Duo Dizavank before and knew her whereabouts, Makoto Senju naturally targeted Nellale Duo Dizavank, who was nicknamed Nelly in his previous life. In order to save time, Makoto Senju set out alone to find Nelly, and asked Haribal to find Synopsis, another Vastod-level hollow in Hukomundo. In other words, Makoto Senju had left behind the seat of the forestier cage more than 50 years ago, and was miraculously promoted to a Vastod-level hollow in the past 50 years. Makoto Senju sensed Synopsis' location very clearly after entering Hukomundo, and he has hardly moved at all so far. It was just that due to the distance and plan, Makoto Senju did not meet up with Synopsis first. Now, when he was planning to promote the Vastod-level Great Hollow to Seireitei, so as to secretly control this part of the combat power, he thought of Synopsis again, although, in Senju Makoto's understanding of Synopsis was undoubtedly an extremely weak Great Hollow, a typical weak hollow with poor frontal combat power. However, the number of Vastod in Hukomundo was limited. In line with the principle of not wasting, Senju Makoto planned to simply include Synopsis in the plan of Seireitei. Therefore, after Senju Makoto gave Haribal a detailed description of the location, distance and direction sensed by Synopsis, Senju Makoto and Haribal went their separate ways. Ashwari Cheng. Haribal, who was originally sleeping, suddenly opened his eyes and subconsciously read out this name. At this moment, there were only 3 Achukas-level Great Hollows guarding Haribal: Sun, Apache and Myra. Seeing that Haribal, who had just fallen asleep, suddenly woke up, Sun and others quickly surrounded him and asked him with concern. Master Harrible, are you okay? Is your wound uncomfortable? Do you need to eat? Harrible looked around and saw the eternal night of Hukomundo and the desolate desert. A cold wind that seemed to reveal loneliness blew over, rolling Harrible's golden hair, and his calm green eyes rarely revealed a sense of loneliness. I'm fine. Harrible slowly relaxed his body, leaning his back against a dead tree, and subconsciously touched the healed wound on his chest. Then, Harrible stood up, put one hand on the dead tree, looked into the distance, and asked, "How far is it from the direction indicated by Senju Cheng?" Sun guessed and answered, "Almost, but the location that Lord Ashwa mentioned is likely to be in the Great Hollow Forest, so we need to find the entrance to the Great Hollow Forest nearby." Harrible nodded and said calmly, "Then do it as soon as possible, don't delay that plan." Sunday heard this and gently covered her face and said, "Don't worry, Lord Harrible, no matter what, I will never delay the agreed time for Lord Harrible and Lord Ashwa to meet up." Apache also followed suit. That's right, Harrible's calm green eyes turned and said, "What are you talking about?" Apache answered quickly, "Oh, Lord Harrible doesn't know? Lord Harrible has been saying Lord Ashwa's name in his sleep just now." Harrible asked in a daze, Is this true?" Just as Sunday and Apache were answering excitedly, Myra, who was standing in the corner, frowned and clutched her injured knee tightly, as if she was enduring some pain. Chapter 298 Salapolograms. While being teased by Sun and Apache, Harrible's calm green eyes unconsciously swept through a few waves, but he also keenly noticed the abnormality of Myra, who has always been the most passionate. "Myra!" Harrible called out. "Lord Harrible." Myra quickly raised her head and subconsciously retracted her hands covering her knees. Harrible glanced at Myra and found that Myra seemed to be enduring some pain, so he asked, "What's wrong?" Myra hesitated for a moment and spoke. "Lord Harrible, I'm sorry, my injured knee hurts a little, but it's not a big problem, and there is no problem on the way." However, even though Myra said this, Harrible also understood that Myra just didn't want to be a burden, so she forced herself to answer like this. Otherwise, with Myra's strong and heroic personality, she would never show her weak side anyway. Then, Harrible walked in front of Myra and looked at Myra's knee, which didn't show any problem on the surface. However, compared with what he saw on the surface, Harrible undoubtedly subconsciously chose to believe Myra and said, "If you feel uncomfortable, don't force yourself, take a rest first." Myra gritted her teeth and said, But this will delay the reunion of Lord Harrible and Lord Ashwa." "I'm fine, Lord Harrible." Harrible closed his eyes slightly, thought for a while, and said in an irrefutable tone, "Myra stays here to rest, Apache accompanies Myra, and Sunday and I continue to go to the direction mentioned by Ashwa and Cheng. That's it." Yes, for a moment, the expressions of Sun, Apache and Myra's three-headed Cheng-ge were completely different. Unlike Apache and Myra, Sun, who looked like a white snake, quickly followed Reliable with a look of joy and continued to move forward. Apache looked at the backs of Reliable and Sun gradually disappearing from his sight, and his expression was almost like his back teeth were about to break. He shouted at Myra unhappily, "Damn it, you weak idiot, you made me stay and take care of you." Myra, who has always been quite tough, held her knee tightly, frowned, and ignored Apache's meaning. Apache also felt that something was wrong with this partner who usually lived with him day and night, and asked with concern, "Hey, Myra, are you okay? It hurts." After a moment, Myra grabbed her knee tightly, her voice became a little hoarse, and said, Something seems to be drilling into the knee." Just when Apache was sure that Myra was not joking and looked a little helpless, a playful voice sounded behind Apache and Myra. "What a pity, we couldn't stop Thrible." Apache and Myra heard this and turned back suddenly. What they saw was a being who looked almost the same as a young human male, with pink hair and glasses, and a temperament that was both gentle and evil. Moreover, this being was holding up their glasses with one hand, looking down, and looking at Apache and Myra as if he was looking at some experimental materials. Who are you?" Apache instinctively took an offensive posture and blocked Myra behind him, and asked vigilantly. However, facing Apache's hostility, the pink-haired being's expression hardly changed at all, and just spoke arrogantly and indifferently. "There's no need to be so nervous. Especially after knowing the name of Seireitei, you should also know that there is no point in meaningless resistance. Seireitei." When this name came out, Apache and Myra's eyes shrank. Unlike Harrible, who evolved into Vastode in recent decades, the name Seireitei is quite well known in Hukomundo. Seireitei. he evolved into Vastode hundreds of years ago or even earlier. In order to obtain experimental materials, he personally led a large number of Ichike's-level Great Hollows to invade Soul Society hundreds of years ago, and then retreated safely to Hukomundo. Then, it is said that at the personal invitation of King of Hukomundo Bailajan, he joined the Hukomundo. However, after joining the Hukomundo, rumors related to Seireitei rarely appeared, making many Ichikes believe that Seireitei had been swallowed by Bailajan. In the world of Hukomundo, which has distinct levels, a mere Ichikus has almost no ability to resist a higher level hollow of Vastode. Apache, who was also very aware of this, reminded nervously. What do you want to do? We are subordinates of Lord Harrible. If you attack us, Lord Harrible will not turn a blind eye. Upon hearing this, Seireitei showed a rather evil smile on his face and said, Really? If so, that would be great. The next moment, as Seireitei snapped his fingers, Myra suddenly let out a piercing wail. Myra! Apache quickly turned his head to look in Myra's direction, only to see that Myra's knee, which she had been holding tightly with both hands, suddenly exploded, and a pink tentacle as thick as a thumb emerged from it. It twisted and circled, and crawled out of Myra's exploded wound little by little. What is this? Apache said in shock. Seireitei's finger slightly looked at the pink tentacle, and the pink tentacle instantly shot towards Seireitei, and then seemed to instantly merge into Seireitei's body, and he answered. Nothing, just a little gadget for monitoring and positioning. When you were surrounded by the Ichike's Hukomundo led by Bailajan, and the mysterious hollow named Ashwari and Chim rescued Harrible, I deliberately left it on your 3 Ichikes. What? In an instant, Myra and Apache's expressions were pale, and Apache subconsciously reached out and touched his body, fearing that a large number of pink tentacles would suddenly emerge from his body and entangle him. However, Seireitei raised his eyes and continued to speak to himself. However, the great virtual being called Ashwari and Chim seems to be quite extraordinary. I have placed nearly 100 gadgets on each of you, and in the end only this one, the most deeply hidden one, remained. However, it did allow me to hear some incredible things. Chapter 299 Happy Doctor. As soon as these words came out, Myra and Apache immediately realized the seriousness of the problem. So, Seireitei, with those pink tentacles, was almost monitoring their conversation throughout the whole process. Plan. In other words, most of the plans of Master Ashwari and Master Harrible were probably known to Seireitei. And Seireitei was a subordinate of Bailajan. As a Vastode-level hollow, Seireitei could appear here, so the more terrifying Bailajan might have already set a trap for Master Ashwari. Not good. At this moment, Myra and Apache felt cold all over. A big net woven by despair was covering Myra and Apache, and it was about to strangle them to the point of difficulty breathing. As Seireitei's voice fell, a group of Ichike's-level hollows appeared from the end of Seireitei's side behind him. What a pity! Seireitei lifted his pink hair that fell in front of his eyes and said with some helplessness. When I heard that you were going to the Great Hollow Forest, I rushed over at full speed to stop you, even at the cost of causing abnormal pain. At this point, Seireitei spoke with a somewhat scrutinizing look. In this case, I have to doubt how important you are in Harrible's mind. Will you surrender for your safety, or help me catch Ashwari and Cheng? Gurgle. Seireitei licked his thin lips with his tongue, as if enjoying something longingly. I'm quite curious about this special hollow that was born from a dead tree, and he seems to have some key information about Aaron's Seireitei. However, before Seireitei could finish, Myra, whose leg was almost completely blown off, roared, and her muscles swelled. She grabbed Apache in front of her with her sturdy arms and threw him behind her. She rushed towards Seireitei with a hollow flash in her mouth. Apache, hurry up, you must bring this news to Lord Harrible no matter what. Myra. Apache, who was thrown far away, turned his head and shouted at Myra, but what he saw was the huge smoke caused by Myra's hollow flash. In the distance, there was still a large number of Ichike's surrounding them. Apache's face twitched violently, and he gritted his teeth, burst into tears, and ran away at his own limit. Just as Apache's figure quickly disappeared from the spot, the smoke that enveloped Seireitei and Myra quickly dispersed, revealing Seireitei who was intact and Myra, who was hanging upside down in the air with a lot of pink tentacles, with her eyes rolled back and had lost consciousness. An ignorant and boring lower-level hollow, Seireitei took out a handkerchief from his sleeve without haste, wiped the dust on his face, and then repaired the special clothes on his body to cover up the hollow's unique bone shell that could be seen through the broken clothes. However, Seireitei had no intention of stopping Apache's escape, or rather, this was an act tacitly approved by Seireitei, intending to use Apache's mouth to force Hannibal to turn back and rescue Myra immediately. As for chasing Hannibal into Hutomundo Forest, Seireitei had no such idea at all, especially since Seireitei knew very well that the current Hutomundo Forest was in a sense the territory of another king of Hutomundo. As a member of the Hutomundo Palace, it would be a risky act to rashly enter the Great Hollow Forest. But why did Hannibal go to a certain location on purpose? Was he looking for something related to Seireitei? Thinking of this, Seireitei's expression became more and more greedy and curious. It was just a pity for Seireitei that the information he obtained from Myra was quite limited, and Hannibal had never told Myra and others about the complete plan and goal. However, Seireitei looked at Myra, who was hanging upside down, and the pink tentacles wrapped around Myra tightened a little bit. With Hannibal's character weakness, we have captured this case, so we are not afraid that Hannibal will not show up. At the same time, on the other side of Hutomundo, wearing a cloak that blocks spiritual pressure, Senju Cheng was also rushing on the road in the lonely and boring environment of Hutomundo. However, after sensing the changes in the positions of the forest seeds that were quietly integrated into Hannibal's body, Senju Cheng's expression became a little more puzzled. However, the positions of Hannibal and Synopsis have always been correctly close to each other, which made Senju Cheng feel a little relieved. Although it is unknown what the real combat power of the vegetable hollow Synopsis only knows how to hide is now, it is at least a real vasto-level hollow. With Hannibal and Synopsis, two vasto-level hollows, joining forces, the entire Hutomundo dare not say that it can walk sideways. Unless it encounters a monster of the level of Asian Sussex, it will not be a big problem to retrieve unscathed. On the contrary, Senju Cheng feels that what is more difficult is the situation he is facing now. All he could see was sand. At this moment, Senju couldn't help but miss Unohana's beautiful garden and the hot springs. Even though Hannibal was always by his side, Senju decided that he would return to Soul Society sooner or later, rather than stay in Hutomundo and eat sand. And, the feeling of walking alone in Hutomundo, in the unique environment of Hutomundo, the idea of loneliness would be almost uncontrollably magnified. This also made Senju's mood drop sharply after parting with Hannibal, and he was in a state of boredom, loneliness and unhappiness. In other words, wherever Senju passed by, as long as it was a living thing that could move, Senju would uphold the position that the god of death and the hollows were irreconcilable, and would first slap the other person's mouth twice to make it crooked, and then trigger Doctor's happiness to personally heal the other person before politely asking for directions. When they arrived at the area pointed out by Hannibal where they had met Nell, Senju could not sense the spiritual pressure of Nell as a vast old-level hollow, nor could he even see a single green hair of her. This made Senju face more or less ugly, and his attention was attracted by the spiritual pressure of two Yakuza-level hollows colliding with each other in the distance. Senju did not hesitate at all and went straight to the two spiritual pressure reactions. Chapter 300 Be careful not to die. Boom boom boom. And the two spiritual pressures that were becoming more and more clear were at the highest level, even if they were put into the level of all the Yakuza's level hollows. At least, they were several levels stronger than the three Yakuzas of Apache, Myra, and Sunday. The next moment, as Senju appeared at the edge of the battlefield, two hollows came into view. One was a giant mantis that looked like a human standing up. The other was a white leopard that looked quite slender among the Yakuza's level hollows. At this moment, the battle between them was extremely fierce. The two front limbs of the giant mantis were like huge sickles. When it swung and chopped down, it would almost always stir up large waves of sand. The streamlined white leopard, on the other hand, showed a rare speed among the Yakuzas, turning into a white after image and constantly attacking the giant mantis. The battle situation seemed unusually intense, but from the perspective of Senju, it was not an easy task for them to decide the winner between them. Because the Yakuzas had a spiritual body that would completely lose the possibility of evolution if a part of the other party swallowed it. Therefore, the battle between the two was intense, but also quite cautious. This made Senju, who had played some blood-spurting games with Unohana teacher almost every month in the past 50 years, feel that it was undoubtedly lacking a bit of the bloodiness it should have. Finally, Senju, who was anxiously looking for Nilu's whereabouts, spoke. Stop fighting, you can't kill each other like this. As soon as these words came out, the originally fierce and tense battlefield almost paused instantly. The two Yakuza instinctively distanced themselves from each other and cast their eyes towards Senju. At this moment, Senju Cheng still maintained the fake appearance he had pretended in front of Terrible, with a mask hanging diagonally on his face, slightly adjusted facial features, waist-length black hair, and a cloak that concealed his spiritual pressure. "Who are you?" Mantis Hollow narrowed his eyes and asked. "Just passing by," Senju Cheng answered casually, and then his figure flashed and appeared between Mantis Hollow and White Leopard Hollow. He was not in a good mood and asked in a somewhat stiff tone. "By the way, I want to ask you a question." Although they were a little afraid of the speed displayed by Senju Cheng, the Mantis Hollow and the White Leopard Hollow were obviously not afraid of it. Instead, they were angered by Senju Cheng's contemptuous tone and answered provocatively. "What if I say no? Where did you come from? Get out of here." Senju Cheng raised his eyebrows slightly, tilted his head, and said with a smile, "You will regret it soon if you talk like this." The next moment, the giant Mantis Hollow instantly appeared behind Senju Cheng, and its sharp forelimbs that were like giant sickles chopped towards Senju Cheng's fragile neck like a crescent moon. Boom! In an instant, with Senju Cheng and the giant Mantis Hollow as the center, a huge amount of sand waves were instantly stirred up to tens of meters high under some terrifying impact force, and then fell again like a waterfall. As the stirred sand waves fell completely, the figures of Senju Cheng and the Mantis Hollow also appeared clearly in front of the White Leopard Hollow again. However, that scene made the White Leopard Hollow, who had hesitated a little, take a step back subconsciously. The sharp forelimbs of the Mantis Hollow, which were almost the same size as the body of Thousand Hands Makao, chopped at the neck of Thousand Hands Makao, but Thousand Hands Makao was unscathed, and didn't even move a step. It was as if, the blow of the Mantis Hollow, which was enough to split the hills and ravines of the 100-meter sand sea, was like a hair falling on the other party. Horror! How horrible is this? The two sides are definitely not in the same dimension. Not only the White Leopard Hollow realized this, but the Mantis Hollow's heart had already subconsciously produced fear. How is it possible? How is it possible? Even if this blow fell on a hollow of the level of Vastod, it would be enough to break the defensor. Why? Why? Then, as if it subconsciously denied its existence, the Mantis Hollow's eyes turned red, and the spiritual pressure all over its body burst out. A new pair of sharp forelimbs appeared again close to its body. Immediately, two pairs of sharp forelimbs slashed at Senju Cheng's neck like a large phantom. Boom boom boom. However, amid the huge collision sounds, a gentle but playful voice suddenly came out. "Although your behavior of massaging my neck with all your strength is commendable, you should stop playing around to a certain extent, right? You broke my cloak, but I have studied every part of your body and made it into a specimen, and I can't afford to pay for it." At the moment when Senju Cheng's voice fell, the Mantis Hollow suddenly felt that all four of its forelimbs could not move at all. The blood-red eyes of the Mantis Hollow clearly reflected his sharp forelimbs that had slaughtered countless yokas, which were easily pinched in the palm of the hand by the mysterious and terrifying existence in front of him. The feeling of doing it casually was as if the existence in front of him was pinching the small insect mantis in the world. "I have already warned you, you will regret it." Then, Senju Cheng slightly pinched with 5 fingers, and the seemingly white and slender palm sank into the sharp forelimbs of the Mantis Hollow little by little, leaving clear fingerprints on it. "Damn, bastard, let me go." Under the almost irresistible fear, the Mantis Hollow seemed to have completely aroused the ferocity in his heart. After roaring, the mouth close to Senju Cheng condensed a virtual flash that exuded a breath of destruction. As the huge explosion occurred, in front of the surprised eyes of the Mantis Hollow, his forelimbs escaped from the opponent's control. It works. This means it works. Just as the Mantis Hollow was talking incoherently, the smoke from the explosion was instantly blown away, revealing Senju Cheng, who still seemed to be unharmed. "I'm sorry, it seems that you have some kind of illusion. The reason I let go is simply because I can't draw the sword in that state," Senju Cheng said as he slowly pulled out his zanpakutō from his waist, and then said with a slight smile on his face. "I asked you to cut so many times just now, so it's a reasonable request for me to cut back a little to relieve my boredom, right?" After a pause, Senju Cheng's tone suddenly became a little grim, and then he said, "But I haven't seen warm blood for a long time, so I may be a little heavy-handed. Be careful not to die. I'm still counting on you to answer my questions." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.